Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Lisa Cecilia Harnum. On July 30, 2011, around 10:30 p.m., unusual sounds resembling a woman's screams were heard from the balcony of the 15th floor of a luxury apartment building in Sydney, Australia. Witnesses, confused by the alarming noises, quickly rushed to the building's ground level. There, they discovered a girl's lifeless body who had fallen to her death. Her name was later identified as Lisa Cecilia Harnum. Moments later, a visibly distraught man exited the building, overwhelmed with shock and grief, suggesting it was a tragic accident. Lisa had a passion for dance from a young age and was actively involved in ballet as a teenager. She was well known for her sociable, confident, and energetic personality. In 2005, at the age of 24, Lisa loved to travel and gain new experiences. She grew up in the suburbs of Toronto, Canada. Lisa then moved to Australia. Lisa initially came to Australia on a 12-day working visa. However, she extended her stay by working at a hair and beauty salon in Sydney. The position suited Lisa well, as she had a passion for fashion, unique hairstyles, and the latest beauty trends. Despite being away from home, Lisa kept in touch with her family in Canada, regularly speaking to her mother. Lisa's family was also supportive of her decision to move and her desire to become an Australian citizen. In 2009, Lisa was looking for a new apartment, and a friend introduced her to a potential roommate, Simon Gattani, who was about 10 years older than her. Simon was a shoe importer, known for wearing expensive suits and living a typical lifestyle of successful Sydney businessmen. He and his business partner mainly imported luxury shoes from the United States and sold them online in Australia for a profit. Initially, Lisa told her mother that the accommodation arrangement was only temporary. She planned to stay with Simon while she continued to look for another place to live. Lisa assured her mother that there was nothing to worry about. Lisa moved into Simon's luxurious apartment on the 15th floor of a high-rise building in central Sydney. The apartment had large windows and a spacious balcony. After only 2 months of living together, they began a romantic relationship. Lisa told her mother that she and Simon were starting to date, and their relationship seemed to be progressing rapidly. As their relationship progressed, the couple grew closer and became more serious. On Lisa's 30th birthday in June 2011, Simon proposed to her in front of a large crowd at a restaurant, inviting his closest friends and family to witness the moment. However, just 6 weeks later, on the morning of July 30, 2011, Lisa locked herself in the bathroom of their shared home and called her mother in Canada. She pleaded with her mother to come to Australia and help her escape from Simon. John, her mother, agreed to take time off work to assist her daughter. Meanwhile, Lisa was nearly finished packing her suitcase. John advised her to hurry and take her bag and passport so she could leave the house quickly. On the morning of July 30, a young Japanese student was walking to Liverpool Street to catch a bus. He was waiting at the bus stop on the side of Hyde Park, across from the building where Simon and Lisa lived. While he was waiting, he heard a loud noise that caught his attention. He saw a body falling from the side of the building and a shirtless man standing on the balcony, looking down. Minutes later, Simon, dressed only in his pajamas, ran desperately out of the building toward Lisa's body. The police arrived quickly, but it was too late. Lisa had died in the fall. Her handbag was next to her, and she was fully clothed, except for one shoe, which had probably come off during the fall. In her pocket, there was a torn piece of paper. Surveillance cameras were installed outside, and at the time of Lisa's fall, there were also cameras operating in the apartment. These cameras recorded Simon, clearly distressed, as he ran out of the apartment. Simon returned to his apartment for a moment, and when he left again, the elevator arrived. Simon informed the police about how to operate the security system and cameras in the apartment, but did not mention the hard drive containing the recording from the time of the incident. By the time the police discovered the hard drive, it was gone. This footage could contain important evidence regarding the cause of Lisa's death. The only camera footage that could be obtained was from a camera pointed at the front door of Simon's apartment. The footage clearly shows Lisa trying to leave, followed by Simon pulling her back inside. This incident occurred before she fell. It is clear that a heated argument took place shortly before Lisa died. Simon also admitted that they had gotten into an argument. Neighbors reported hearing Lisa screaming and pleading for help. One neighbor said they heard a knock on the door, followed by silence. Simon explained to the police what had caused the argument. Lisa had told Simon that she had something to confess. According to Simon, they calmed down and agreed to discuss their problems in detail. Simon then went into the kitchen to make them tea. While in the kitchen, he asked Lisa again about the secret she wanted to tell. At that moment, Lisa ran out to the balcony and Simon followed her. Simon believed that Lisa was putting on a dramatic act to frighten him, which was typical of her behavior. In the past, she had done similar things, like opening the doors of a moving vehicle and threatening to jump out. On one occasion, she actually did jump out, but he was driving slowly at the time. Simon said she ran to the balcony. Unfortunately, Lisa lost her balance and fell off the balcony before she could react. Simon rushed to the edge of the balcony, trying to catch her, but it was too late. He shouted her name, and he attracted the attention of a young student standing below. At first, Simon's account seemed credible, but upon closer examination, some doubts arose about his account. Why would Lisa have carried the handbag if her intention was only to scare Simon? A key witness had observed the tragic incident that morning. Joshua, a witness, was walking in the park around 10 a.m. when he heard strange noises coming from the balcony on the 15th floor. He looked up and saw Simon standing there, shirtless, holding what appeared to be a black suitcase. Joshua watched as Simon took something out of the suitcase and threw it off the balcony. Although Joshua could not understand what Simon had thrown, he rushed over to find out what was going on. When he arrived, he saw a crowd of people trying to help a young woman. He then noticed Simon running towards the crowd. Joshua had previously seen Simon staring at Lisa's body from a distance for a long time before running down. Joshua was working as an editor for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation when he witnessed the incident. He continued to work, but when news of Lisa's death spread online, he realized he had witnessed it and contacted the police to tell them what he had seen. After investigation, the police discovered a letter that Lisa wrote to her mother. The content of the letter said that she thought she loved this man, but he controlled her life too much. In the letter, Lisa expressed that she missed her family and friends. Through the investigation, the police learned that Simon had convinced Lisa to quit her job at the beauty salon and stop attending fitness classes at the public gym. He controlled her daily life. Simon arranged for a personal trainer and set up a home gym for her. Simon even required Lisa to wear simple clothes so as not to attract attention. He asked her to tie her hair back and avoid wearing makeup. Unfortunately, the family only realized how isolated Lisa had become after her death. However, Simon saw their relationship differently. He stated that although he controlled their relationship, he believed it was filled with love and affection. The police later discovered a recording from Lisa's voice recorder just a month before her death. In this recording, Lisa was talking to Simon. She expressed that she only communicated with him and that her entire life revolved around him. She then cried and was confused about how her life had changed so drastically. In addition, the police also discovered that Simon had once written to Lisa, "You should never talk to or look at other men besides me. I have to be the only one for you." 6 weeks before Lisa died, she had shown clear signs that she wanted to end the relationship. Lisa had asked her fitness trainer to hold on to some of her belongings until she could get them back. On the morning of 30 July, Lisa locked herself in the bathroom and secretly called her mother. They agreed to meet in Sydney later. John said she had never realized how closely Simon had followed Lisa. Lisa had told John, her mother, that she found it strange that Simon always seemed to know where she was, but at the time, neither she nor her mother thought much of it. Lisa suspected that Simon was monitoring all of her calls, texts, and emails. In addition, he had installed surveillance cameras in their apartment to closely monitor her every move. A note found in her pocket revealed that she only discovered the existence of these cameras at the last minute. Through the footage, Simon learned about Lisa's intentions to leave him, her interactions with her coach, her conversations with her mother, and her plans to fly to Canada. Simon Gittany was charged with murder by police, and he was initially arrested but later released on bail. He pleaded not guilty in January 2012 and was released on bail until his trial began in November 2013. The media were not allowed inside the courtroom. A notable focus was Simon's new girlfriend, 23-year-old Rachel Louise. Her striking resemblance to Lisa attracted media attention and increased interest in the trial. Rachel has consistently shown her support for Simon throughout the trial, speaking out about his innocence whenever possible. She reportedly contributed about $85,000 of her own savings to pay for his defense attorney. The trial took place and lasted 4 weeks, starting on October 21, 2013. Simon's defense claimed that Lisa intended to jump over the railing due to her ongoing depression, but this explanation seemed unlikely. Material evidence could help clarify the situation. The balcony railing was 1.2 meters high, while Simon was only 1.65 meters tall, suggesting it would have been difficult for him to lift Lisa, who weighed about 50 kilograms, over the railing. Given Simon's age and build, could he have physically lifted and thrown Lisa off the balcony? Simon's brother Anthony attempted to recreate the scene to counter the prosecution's version of events. The reenactment showed that in order to throw Lisa over the railing, Simon would have needed to carry her a distance and maneuver around obstacles such as the treadmill and flower pots while struggling. This would have been nearly impossible without touching the railing. But when the police arrived, everything was intact. Surveillance camera footage from the building showed that the incident took place over the course of just a few minutes, which would not have been enough time to clean up the crime scene. According to Simon, Lisa fell from the balcony. If the couple had argued, there would likely have been evidence of a struggle on their bodies, but none was found. Neighbors reported hearing screaming in the hallway and near the apartment door for over a minute, suggesting that Lisa was unconscious or that the couple had chosen to resolve the argument amicably, although this is unlikely. The investigation found no signs of trauma other than those caused by Lisa's fall, suggesting that it was unlikely that she had been unconscious due to a head injury. It is also unclear how she would have been able to hold on to her bag if she had been unconscious. These points cast doubt on the testimony of the main witness, who claimed that Simon had deliberately killed Lisa. Joshua was the only person who witnessed the moments before Lisa fell, while the others only reported hearing some noises. Joshua, the international student closest to the incident, was facing the building when he heard a loud noise. He looked up but did not see what was causing it. Joshua described hearing loud, frantic screams. He initially thought the screams were someone arguing and throwing something from the balcony. When he looked up, he saw a shirtless man throwing what appeared to be a black sports bag or luggage from the 15th floor. In court, Joshua agreed with Simon's defense that the screams were heard shortly after he saw the man on the balcony. Joshua explained that this all happened in fractions of a second. When asked if his testimony could be inaccurate due to his distance from the crime scene and the timing, he acknowledged that it could be. The evidence suggests Simon is innocent, as it would be impossible to commit such an act in just a few minutes without leaving a mess. However, during the investigation, police uncovered Simon's past. He was first arrested for assault as a teenager in 1991 after a confrontation with his ex-girlfriend's employer. Simon allegedly harassed her at her workplace in a Sydney shopping center. Her employer decided to defend her, but after the fight, Simon brought a dozen friends with him and they attacked his ex-girlfriend's employer. Simon was later caught in a car with stolen goods when police arrived at his home after he failed to attend a scheduled court hearing. He attacked 2 police officers at the age of 20 and was charged with assaulting a police officer after biting off the officer's earlobe. Simon served 2 years in prison. However, he did not serve his full sentence and was released on bail. In the following years, he was arrested for supplying drugs and convicted in New South Wales, receiving a 3-year prison sentence. By the time Lisa had unwittingly moved in with him, Simon had started a women's footwear import business operating through a website, appearing to be a legitimate and successful businessman. The final trial lasted several hours before the judge delivered his verdict. The judge found Joshua's testimony to be credible. They found Simon's testimony unconvincing, suggesting he appeared to be acting rather than being sincere. The judge concluded that, although Simon had a coherent story, his account lacked the necessary details to be considered credible. When the jury returned a guilty verdict for murder, Simon's girlfriend Rachel shouted at the judge, "You're completely wrong," and left the courtroom in tears. She became the target of fierce criticism from the media in Australia and abroad for supporting Simon. Rachel later sued the Daily Telegraph over 3 articles that allegedly portrayed her as a prostitute. Rachel eventually won an undisclosed settlement from the Daily Telegraph and continued to maintain that Simon was not guilty of murder. The judge sentenced Simon Gittany, then 40, to 26 years in prison for the murder of Lisa Cecilia Harnum. He will be eligible for parole on 21 May 2031. Lisa's family traveled from Toronto to Sydney to attend the trial. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Maria Luisa Cedeno. On July 18, 2020, Maria Luisa Cedeno arrived at the Lamb Mission Inn Hotel in Manuel Antonio, in the Costa Rican province of Puntarenas. She was traveling with her little dog named Mafalda, it she treated like a daughter. The first day passed without incident. Maria Luisa went to the beach, had lunch at a restaurant, and drank some alcohol, activities common for tourists. However, the following day, everything changed. At 4:30 p.m. sharp, Maria requested that a bottle of wine, mineral water, and 2 glasses be brought to her room. It's worth noting that she didn't mention being with anyone, and everyone around her was convinced that she wanted to rest alone. Throughout the entire afternoon and night, no movement was recorded in her room. On July 20th, the hotel staff tried to contact her, but they received no response. A staff member had previously spoken with Maria, who mentioned that she lived alone because she had recently separated from her boyfriend, was not feeling well, and was only traveling with her small dog, Mafalda. Since several months had passed since the official start of the pandemic, Maria said that this had also affected her mental health, which was deteriorating. Considering everything she had been through, she said she needed a vacation. Therefore, the hotel staff decided to enter the room to check regularly in case of any unforeseen circumstances. The front door was locked from the inside, so they looked for another way in and checked the door leading to the patio. This room had an emergency exit for guests with pets. They had previously opened the patio door so the dog could go outside. When the staff approached this exit, they found the door half open. Upon entering, they were hit by a terrible odor and saw blood stains throughout the room. The dog was alive, trembling in a corner and avoiding the staff, likely due to trauma or fear. The lifeless body of Maria was found lying motionless on the bed, wrapped in a sheet. Maria Luisa Cedeno was a highly respected anesthesiologist. At 43, she led the Department of Anesthesiology and Rehabilitation at Sima Hospital in Escazú. Her colleagues admired her greatly, and during the early pandemic, she was notably committed to helping patients in need. As a medical professional, she provided significant support to her loved ones, arranging health insurance, assisting with medical appointments. Maria's parents lived in San Carlos, which made it difficult for her to be with her family all the time. Friends described her as a strong, intelligent, and likable woman who loved traveling both within Costa Rica and internationally. Her reputation was impeccable. The news of Maria's death was a tremendous shock to her family and Costa Rica. People were left asking, who would want to harm someone like Maria? From the moment the hotel staff discovered the lifeless Maria body, the mysteries of this case began. The crime scene is confusing, not only because of the brutality Maria endured, but also because of the mysteries that arise as soon as they enter the hotel room she rented. Like most hotels worldwide, this hotel keeps a record of the magnetic keys used for the rooms. This means that each time a room is accessed, the card used is recorded, and the key's code is identified. This system allows they to determine whether the person accessing the room was a guest or a hotel employee. In Maria's murder, there was no record of any other keys being used other than hers. Maria had entered her room alone the previous night, with no one else entering through the main door. However, the room had a sliding glass door at the back that could be used as an alternative entry point. Since this door could only be locked from the inside, it is possible that Maria left the door unlocked, either intentionally letting someone in or accidentally leaving the door open. This allowed someone to enter and commit the murder. As the door didn't have an electronic lock system, there was no record of anyone entering or exiting through it. This was considered the most logical explanation at the time. After discovering Maria's body, hotel staff immediately contacted the police. Upon examining the scene, it was clear that she had been brutally murdered. Her body showed severe damage, indicating that she had been tortured by someone who was extremely enraged. Forensic experts collected evidence and analyzed every detail to determine the cause of death and identify the perpetrator. The authorities recommended a closed casket at the funeral due to the extreme level of brutality inflicted upon Maria. An autopsy was later performed, which showed that the body had multiple bite marks and 2 broken fingernails, indicating that Maria attempted to defend herself. The autopsy also revealed that the killer cleaned the she-body after the murder. According to the investigator, Maria was killed in the bedroom, as evidenced by the large amount of blood found on the bed. The killer then moved the body to the bathroom, washed and dried it, wrapped it in a sheet, and placed it back on the bed. Although the killer attempted to wash the Maria body to eliminate evidence, this proved nearly impossible due to the extensive presence of blood throughout the room. Bloodstains were found on the floor, walls, curtains, and bed, indicating the brutality of the attack. The forensic experts took photographs and collected as much physical evidence as possible from the scene. The body was then sent for an autopsy, and the police started interviewing the hotel staff and guests who may have witnessed or heard something. Given the state of the crime scene, it is likely that Maria screamed violently and her dog barked loudly during the attack. However, no one reported hearing any screams throughout the night. The hotel was relatively empty, but there were still a few people working at the hotel, and the hotel owner, Harry Bowden, who lived there with his husband Dano, were also present there. Additionally, Harry had allowed some acquaintances to stay at the hotel due to their financial difficulties. A bottle of wine and 2 glasses were found in Maria's hotel room. The wine had been ordered from room service. Later, investigators examined Maria's cell phone and found that she had sent a photo of the 2 glasses to a friend. However, the message did not indicate that she was with someone or she was waiting for someone to come to her room. She also sent an audio message to the same friend describing the hotel's all-inclusive package and its benefits. Maria seemed pleased with the service, mentioning that staff would bring her drinks, fruit, and other treats. She also mentioned interacting with hotel staff, including the bartender and hotelier's assistant, and noted that the owner was Dutch. Although she acknowledged the hotel is a bit worn out and understaffed, she expressed her overall satisfaction with her stay. The room cost 155,000 colons per night. Authorities investigating Maria's murder spoke with her friends and relatives to identify suspect. They discovered that she often ordered 2 glasses, even when alone, to have one for alcohol and one for water. This suggested she wasn't waiting for anyone at the time of the attack. The investigation revisited the initial theory: the attacker must have been someone who saw Maria in the hotel, noticed the back door was open and attacked her. However, the extreme brutality of the crime suggests that the killer had deep hatred and anger towards the victim, and often the killer knew the victim. Even so, there is no evidence that Maria was with anyone or had enemies at the time of her death. The autopsy revealed additional details about Maria's death, including signs of strangulation, blows to her face, arms, and chest, and evidence of abuse. After analyzing the autopsy results, conducting interviews with family, friends, and hotel staff, authorities concluded that the attack was likely carried out by multiple individuals. This theory was based on the fact that there were no reports of Maria screaming during the attack. Authorities believed that at least 2 attackers were involved, and they took complete control of Maria. Some investigators even suggested that a third person may have been involved, as the victim showed signs of abuse. According to this theory, 2 assailants held Maria Luisa down and a third raped her. All of this is evidenced by the fact that when her body was analyzed, there was no sign of rope or anything to indicate that she was tied up. Police speculated that the men may have stuffed something into Maria's mouth to stop her from screaming or to prevent her screams from being heard, in order to carry out the attack undetected. The cause of death was determined to be a head injury, which could have occurred in several ways. It might have been caused by a violent blow to the head, by being undressed, as there was evidence of fractured vertebrae, or by being hit with an object or falling heavily to the floor. Overall, what the assailants did to Maria was an atrocity, and without clear motivation. The first suspect was quickly identified because this man, who was staying at the hotel, had numerous fresh wounds resembling scratches and blows, suggesting he had been defending himself. Upon investigation, it was revealed to be Teodoro Herrera Martinez, an exotic dancer working in the city's nightclubs and staying at the hotel at the time of the murder. Teodoro was arrested when authorities were looking for evidence that he was involved in the murder. The man's footprints were compared to those at the crime scene. 2 matching prints were found on the black ceramic tile floor in front of the bed in the bedroom. A short time later, a second suspect named Luis Carlos Miranda was arrested. A hotel security guard had seen him walking in the hallways at night with Teodoro. Because Torreira was already in custody, Luis needed to be questioned to check for any links to the case. Additionally, tests revealed that his dental records matched the bite marks on Maria's body. Hotel employees testified that they saw Maria talking to Luis and, on one occasion, to Teodoro. However, their interactions were casual, like simple greetings, rather than those of acquaintances or friends. This might be because there were very few guests at the hotel, so they may have passed each other many times. Earlier, the hotel owner allowed 2 friends, Luis and Teodoro, to stay on the property due to financial difficulties. The police decided to question the owner of the hotel, Harry Bowden, after finding matching footprints and bite marks from the 2 suspects, Luis and Teodoro. During questioning, Harry revealed that on the night of the murder, July 19, 2020, he and husband were having dinner in their apartment within the hotel with Luis and Teodoro. After dinner, the 4 men went to a private pool. Harry also disclosed that Luis and Teodoro worked for him in exchange for accommodation. Luis managed the website and marketing, while Teodoro worked as a cook and bartender. The hotel owners and Luis and Teodoro were not close friends initially, but after moving into the hotel a year before the murder, they started spending more time together, going out for meals and socializing. And thus, the four men became friends. Although Harry cooperated by giving an interview in August 2020, but he was arrested because bite marks found on Maria's body matched his dental records, which began to reveal the truth. The police confiscated the phones of all the detainees and found text messages between Luis and Harry that turned out to be very compromising. In these messages, Luis invited Harry to have an intimate relationship with a woman he had been following. This exchange happened several days before the incident. However, Luis and Harry claimed that the messages didn't mean anything and that they were just joking, but that, along with the physical evidence, was enough for the authorities to keep them in jail while the case was being put together. The only person not arrested was Harry's husband. Because there was no evidence against him, no text messages, no fingerprints, and the bite marks didn't match those on Maria's body. Luis, Harry, and Teodoro's defense argued that the bite mark evidence was inconclusive and that none of them were involved in the murder. Despite this, the three men were charged with the murder of Maria. Before the trial, Harry's lawyer requested that he be released and placed under house arrest for two reasons. First, due to Harry being 69 years old, staying in jail was risky. Second, he had difficulty walking due to recent knee surgery. The defense claimed he had been using a cane for a long time, and at the trial's start, he appeared in a wheelchair. Because of this request, he was placed under house arrest and returned to the hotel where he was staying, and he couldn't leave the hotel. On September 13, 2022, the trial of Luis, Harry, and Teodoro began, where evidence against them was presented. The prosecution struggled to prove the involvement of Harry and Luis. They had text messages and bite marks on Maria's body as evidence. However, the bite marks couldn't definitively identify the murderer, they could only exclude suspects. All hotel employees were ruled out as suspects, but not these two, Harry and Luis. In contrast, Teodoro had the most evidence against him. There was a blood trail, and he had wounds inflicted by Maria during her self-defense, as his blood was found under her fingernails. Blood was also found on his shoes, watch, and cell phone, located in his room during the search. Given this evidence, only Teodoro Herrera Martinez was convicted and sentenced to 50 years in prison, while Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda were acquitted due to a lack of physical evidence. Many people believe that Luis and Harry were involved in the murder because the hotel security cameras mysteriously stopped working on the day it happened. This suggests that someone might have planned it. A hotel security guard was also suspected, but he and the other two individuals could not be arrested due to a lack of evidence. Strangely, the guard left for another country after the murder, even though the police asked him to attend the trial as a witness. There are several aspects of this case that suggest more people might be involved. For example, two guests told the police that the hotel experienced a power outage for many hours on the night of the murder, which may have been intentional. This could have been done to disable the security cameras and the magnetic keys. A peculiar detail is that 9 days after the murder, investigators searched Harry's private office, which may have given him enough time to destroy any evidence. They not only analyzed text messages but also looked at Luis and Harry's social media accounts, where they discovered discussions about an idea directly related to how to find Maria's body. Legally, Harry and Luis are presumed innocent. The only person in prison for this murder is Teodoro Herrera Martinez, who is awaiting a new trial to see if his sentence can be reduced. Although the case is solved, but the Maria family suspects something is being hidden. They suspect a defense or cover-up. The family reported that the authorities returned Maria's belongings soaked in blood, which they find puzzling because they wanted to preserve the evidence in case new information emerged. They are satisfied with Teodoro's conviction, but not with the acquittal of Harry and Luis. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Andrew Steele. Ashley Kristen was born in California. From a young age, she helped her mother with housework and took care of her siblings. Her relatives appreciated her support, although childcare could be a challenge. Young Ashley was willing to help her mother in many ways, which helped her mature faster than her peers. This early maturity may have contributed to her first love story, which began when she was just 12 years old. She met a boy named Andrew Steele and they felt an immediate connection. Unlike many of her peers, Ashley was not into parties or frivolous activities. She was quite modest. Their relationship continued throughout high school and was serious from the start. After finishing high school, Ashley's family moved to Minnesota, but she and Andrew managed to maintain their relationship despite the distance. They kept in touch through phone calls and letters, seeing each other occasionally but not often. During this time, they focused on their studies and college preparation while still taking time to connect. They were both committed to building a future together, knowing that getting a degree was essential to their plans. After graduation, they planned to move in together and start a family. Their dreams began to come true in 1998 when Ashley graduated with her bachelor's degree. After receiving their degrees, they decided to have a wedding and planned a solemn event that they had been waiting for many years. Ashley and Andrew exchanged vows at the altar, and with rings exchanged, a new chapter began in their lives. Meanwhile, the young husband got a job with the county sheriff, while Ashley was completely absorbed in her work and continued to build a career in finance. At first, things went smoothly for Ashley. She demonstrated impressive expertise in her field and handled even the most challenging tasks with ease. After years of working in finance, she took a job as a teacher at a local preschool. The preschool environment allowed her to reconnect with her previous experiences caring for siblings. In the early 2000s, Ashley's dream came true when she welcomed two children, Jack and Rachel, into her family. The couple's love story seemed complete, but fate had other plans. During this time, Ashley began to notice worrying signs in her husband, Andrew. At first, she noticed a slight tremor in his hands. Although he tried to hide his struggles, everyone around him soon noticed. The tremors were so severe that he had difficulty holding objects. As his initial anxiety increased, Andrew began to have difficulty speaking and his hand tremors became more severe. Communicating with others became increasingly difficult, and at times he was completely unable to speak. Even simple daily tasks became difficult for him. At times, the tremors were so severe that Andrew had difficulty eating. His wife did everything she could to support him, standing by his side in his fight against the disease. But it was clear that he was losing. On June 4, 2014, Andrew received a life-changing diagnosis. He had Lou Gehrig's disease, also known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. At the age of 39, he was diagnosed with this rare, incurable disease that affects the central nervous system. ALS leads to degeneration of both upper and lower motor neurons, resulting in paralysis and muscle atrophy. Unfortunately, many people with the disease only have a life expectancy of 2 to 5 years after diagnosis. At this point in his life, Andrew was a deputy sheriff and everything was about to change for him and his family. As his health declined, Andrew struggled to perform his work duties. This deterioration worried his loved ones. They felt helpless as they watched his condition worsen. He was eventually laid off, which put even more strain on his family. At that time, the wife was not working, and for the first time, the family faced such difficulties that forced them to count cents. Ashley struggled to provide for her family. She worked part-time, but unfortunately her job paid very little. This made it difficult for her to make ends meet. During this difficult time, Ashley continued to care for her husband and protect their children. However, Andrew needed expensive medication and specialist medical equipment installed at home to improve his condition. Although the medication initially helped alleviate some of his symptoms, the costs were high and their financial situation became worse as they had to pay for these essentials. Despite their financial struggles, Ashley was determined to prolong her husband's life, maintain their standard of living, and provide for their family. To do this, they contacted a charity that supports patients with rare diseases. With an official diagnosis from a doctor, Andrew registered with the organization. Unfortunately, the charity was later shut down due to violations and possible financial fraud. This was a disastrous failure, especially since the charity had promised to cover the cost of installing medical equipment and the couple had pinned all their hopes on this support. After facing this challenge, the couple had to seek help from friends and acquaintances, as they felt they had no other choice. They needed to raise around $80,000. Andrew was surprised when people came together to support him. A friend suggested that Ashley take charge of the fundraising efforts. She created a special social media page where people could donate to her husband. She also held various contests and themed events to draw attention to their cause. This approach successfully raised funds and helped cover some of their expenses. Ashley remained determined to reach their goal until the very end. Her dedication stemmed from her desire to prolong her beloved husband's life. The outpouring of support from friends surprised Andrew, and he was grateful for their willingness to help him through his illness. He had never expected so many people to support him. Through this crowdfunding effort, they quickly raised over $23,000, which was used to purchase much-needed medical supplies. Eventually, the medical equipment installation for Andrew, a former police officer, was completed and the donations continued to pour in. Over time, Ashley became the manager and organizer of a large fundraising event. At first, she received little support, but over time, she was able to support other foundations working for similar causes. She constantly discussed her husband's condition and shared updates on social media. By this time, they had been married for 26 years, enjoying a long and happy life together. Doctors encouraged Andrew to do the things he had always wanted to do, but had not yet done. Andrew recalled a memory from his school years when he and his friends performed on stage, imitating the legendary rock band Guns N' Roses. He recalled the enthusiastic applause of the audience, making it the most thrilling moment of his life. He longed to experience that joy again. On August 16, 2014, Ashley and her friends held a concert to fulfill her husband's long-cherished dream. Thanks to invitations sent through the support fund, the entire group that had performed together decades ago reunited for the event. More than 300 people attended, and the musicians were moved to tears. The scale and importance of the event attracted media attention, as Andrew's battle with the disease was considered interesting by journalists and widely reported. Andrew's health was deteriorating and he was facing a tragic end. After giving the interview, Andrew decided to throw a farewell party for the two most important women in his life, his devoted wife Ashley and younger sister, Casey Tolles. The sisters looked very similar, differing only by age and hair color. Andrew invited both women to the party, which surprised Casey's husband because she was the only one going. However, this was considered the last wish of a dying man, so no one questioned it. On Friday, August 22, 2014, Ashley and Casey gathered at their home in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, to enjoy a weekend with him. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. However, around 1 p.m., Casey called 911 in a panic, trying to stay calm. On the phone, she reported that a shooting had occurred at her sister's house. She explained that Andrew had picked up a gun, shot her, then pointed it at his wife Ashley. She ran away from him and called for help. Police and ambulances rushed to Andrew's house. Outside the front door, they found Casey, wrapped in a towel. She was bleeding and bruised, crying that she was dying. She was quickly placed on a stretcher and taken to the hospital. The interior of the house was in disarray, making it difficult for the police to immediately understand the situation. Meanwhile, they returned to the house without realizing that Andrew was still inside and cautiously entered, gun drawn. They were unable to go out into the hallway due to the thick smoke that made it impossible to see. A perimeter was set up around the house to prevent anyone from entering or exiting undetected. A tactical team equipped with gas masks and equipment for extreme conditions arrived. Armed police surrounded the area. When the police called out to anyone inside with their hands up and received no response, they had no choice but to enter the house. They needed to act quickly, as something was clearly burning inside and the fire department was waiting outside. However, it was still too dangerous to put out the fire, as there could be people inside, including potential threats. In the couple's bedroom, the police found the body of a 30-year-old woman who had been shot in the head. A black tie was tightly wrapped around her neck. Although the task force arrived quickly, they were unable to save her. She died instantly from her injuries. The source of the smoke in the room was determined. Andrew had set up a portable grill inside, filled to the brim with charcoal, filling the room with thick, acrid smoke. Andrew himself was found lying on the floor next to the oven, with a pistol close to his hand. An officer moved his weapon aside, and at that moment, Andrew woke up. He had inhaled smoke and was severely impaired. The officer quickly subdued, handcuffed Andrew, and extinguished the oven. Andrew was rescued from the smoke-filled room just minutes before he died of smoke inhalation. During the 911 call, Casey mentioned that Andrew may have tried to end his life. She did not know what was going on in the couple's bedroom after younger sister's husband attacked her. According to Casey, after being shot, she heard more gunshots and saw Andrew pointing a gun at his wife's head. Casey then attempted to escape from the room, hoping that Andrew would be distracted and not notice her. She successfully hid in the basement and called emergency services. Meanwhile, Andrew was turning on the oven, intending to die of smoke inhalation. When the police arrested him, he was in very bad shape. He also had superficial wounds on his body. While investigating the events leading up to the brutal massacre, police discovered footage of Andrew purchasing 2 large bags of charcoal. It is unclear whether the attack on the 2 women was intentional. It was later discovered that Andrew had been planning a party, making the purchase of charcoal for grilling seem plausible. Ashley and Casey thought the items were for grilling, so no one found his purchases suspicious. Police are now faced with the daunting task of finding out why Andrew would commit such a horrific act against the people he claimed were his closest loved ones. Emergency crews rushed Casey, 38, to hospital, supporting her along the way, but she was unconscious. At the medical center, doctors fought for her life for hours on the operating table. Casey's injuries were so severe, she was sweating profusely. Unfortunately, she did not survive. Andrew, 39, was taken to a medical center under police guard. Fortunately, his injuries were not as serious as initially feared and were not life-threatening. He was released from hospital after a few days but was immediately arrested for double murder. Police suspect the crime was premeditated. That same day, Andrew made his first court appearance, conducted via video link. He was a respected sheriff's deputy who had become a suspect in a case that shocked the state for its senselessness and brutality. Andrew was arrested and his bail was set at $1 million. He was also banned from contacting his 2 children, aged 10 and 1, who are currently living with his wife's relatives. On September 11, 2014, the defendant appeared in court for his first in-person hearing. There was clear evidence linking the defendant to the murder of Ashley. The gun used in the crime contained only Andrew's DNA. The prosecution presented evidence that the murder was premeditated. They argued that Andrew had planned the crime for a long time. The main evidence supporting this claim was data from Andrew's cell phone, which contained numerous internet searches, including photos and videos of instructions on how to kill people, found on his device. Police discovered several online searches on Andrew's browser about effective and painless ways to kill people. Eventually, Andrew decided to use a gun. He chose a time when the children were visiting relatives to carry out his plan. Notably, he had written a will just one day before the attacks, suggesting he had planned to end his life after harming the women. However, things did not go as planned and Casey called for help. The only problem for the prosecution was that there was no clear motive. The couple was very much in love, and Andrew could not have profited from his wife's death. This also raised the question of why he would commit the murder when he himself was only expected to live a few months. Despite the substantial evidence against him, the court decided to continue the investigation and increased bail to $2 million. The trial was scheduled for April 13, 2015. However, on February 27, 2015, Andrew's health deteriorated significantly. He was brought into the courtroom for a preliminary hearing, where he pleaded not guilty, claiming amnesia. The defense argued that Andrew's illness left him unable to distinguish between good and evil, and between fact and fiction. He suffered from severe depression, which caused him to impulsively contemplate killing or react aggressively when provoked. Due to memory problems, the defendant was unable to recall these events and claimed that he had no control over what he did, attributing this loss of control to his deteriorating health. On March 27, 2015, Andrew amended his testimony. He admitted to killing his wife, Ashley, but maintained that he did not act out of malice. Instead, he claimed that his actions were entirely due to his medical condition. The defense faced a challenging task, as they needed to prove that Andrew's mental and emotional state had significantly deteriorated, as this contributed to the crime. They had to show a link between his illness and the murder, proving that he was not aware of his actions when he committed the double murder. To secure a favorable verdict, the defense had to convince at least 10 of the 12 jurors of Andrew's innocence. Now, the decision is in the hands of psychiatrists. Dr. Stephen Morse is responsible for assessing Andrew's condition. In his professional opinion, Andrew Steele's illness is not recognized as a mental disorder. Instead, it is a nervous system problem that can lead to cognitive and memory problems. However, there has never been a documented case of someone committing murder or acting aggressively due to this illness. On April 13, 2015, Andrew Steele's trial began. The defense quickly launched its defense, arguing that his medical condition was the primary cause of the tragic events, for which he was deeply remorseful. The attorney highlighted his professional achievements and best qualities. He recounted Andrew's struggle with a rare disease that eventually drove him insane, leading to the deaths of 2 women. Presenting numerous friends and family members to testify in his favor. Acquaintances of the man testified that doctors had been monitoring the patient's condition for a long time. According to numerous witnesses, after the defendant learned of his fatal diagnosis, he fell into a deep depression. He was completely devastated, despite having an excellent relationship with his wife and children, as well as with friends. Unfortunately, fate decreed that he fell ill with a terrible disease, and he could have died. Against this background, the hero of the story significantly worsened his mental and emotional state, which could not go unnoticed. Witnesses said that for a long time, Andrew did not have problems with his memory, as the doctors had mentioned. However, these issues began on that fateful day in August 2014, which looked rather suspicious in the opinion of the prosecutor's office. This suspicion arose against the backdrop of the discovery of the man's notes, including a fresh will. All of this seemed to be part of an insidious plan, and the prosecution interpreted the text entries as preparation for murder. The prosecutor found confirmation of the assumptions about the premeditation of the crime, as well as evidence of a desire to voluntarily leave this life. This information became the main evidence on which the prosecutors relied. However, the defense did not lag behind in eloquence. According to the lawyer, these entries were evidence of the man's delirious state, which had begun long before the tragedy. He made spontaneous, incoherent notes that, if desired, could be interpreted in any way. The lawyer was sure that the evidence of the killer's innocence was on his mobile phone and tried to challenge the prosecution's opinion. The note about the will created by Andrew on August 21st, the day before the double murder, became a turning point in this court battle. The last time it was edited was on August 22nd at 6 a.m. The prosecutor's office claimed that the text contained direct references to a planned murder. The lawyers attempted to refute these claims, calling the text unrelated delirium. Unusual behavior of the criminal was confirmed by one of his sisters named Haley. The woman went on holiday with her brother and his wife sometime after Andrew learned of his diagnosis. During this period, when his sister was changing into a swimsuit and was in her personal room at the hotel, Andrew suddenly burst in. He just stood there for a while, looking at her with an empty gaze. Afterward, Haley came out, convinced that he was not himself. Similar incidents happened repeatedly. Several women from the prosecutor's office continued to insist that it was not typical for people with Andrew's illness to display cruelty and aggression. Before this episode, the disorder had never been considered a reason for an attack. However, according to the defense, it did not mean that the illness could not provoke anything like this at all, and it could proceed according to its own individual scenario. Andrew himself told a new, astonishing story of what happened at the trial. According to the defendant, that day he was going to engage in a sexual act with his wife while her sister was on the first floor. He claimed that Ashley liked strangulation during sex, so he used a black tie around her neck. However, in a fit of passion, he pulled it too tightly, and his wife began to choke. Andrew was unable to notice it in time. After that, Casey heard a suspicious noise upstairs and kicked down the bedroom door. Andrew remembered only that moment when she burst inside, and then there was a gap in his memory until the police arrived at the call. The confession seemed absurd. The deceased, Casey, told a completely different story during the 911 call. There was no damage to the bedroom door. It didn't look like it had been kicked in. The prosecutor's office provided several dozen photographs from the crime scene and the victim's body, revealing obvious discrepancies with the defendant's testimony. In particular, he claimed that they had naked sex, but Mrs. Steele was wearing a dress in the images. It was unlikely that he dressed her after her death. There was also confusion regarding tying up his wife. Andrews stated that he used handcuffs, then plastic cables, and then started talking about ropes on her wrists and ankles, although there were no signs of tying on her legs. However, there were signs on her hands. Cable ties were found lying on the living room floor in front of the sofa, and there was a pair of handcuffs on the coffee table. Casey's blood was discovered on the dining room carpet, along with bloody marks that suggested she was likely shot in the living room. Andrew's DNA was found under Casey's fingernails, indicating they had fought. Casey had numerous bruises and abrasions, as well as gunshot wounds to her lower body. She also suffered a broken nose and a cerebral hemorrhage, pointing to a violent struggle. Police noted that Casey was found wrapped in a towel and not wearing any clothes, raising suspicions that Andrew may have attempted to assault her. However, Casey did not mention this during the call, possibly because she didn't have time to reveal the full truth. Another theory is that Andrew knew he was dying and he loved these women, which led him to decide to take them with him. It is possible that his twisted love and fear of dying alone drove him to commit this horrific act. Considering these factors, the prosecutor was convinced that the double murder was premeditated and executed according to a calculated plan. On April 23, 2015, after 2 weeks of thorough questioning and testimonies, the jury began deliberating the verdict. The families of the deceased women were profoundly disappointed when the jury concluded that Andrew lacked the mental capacity to understand his actions during the massacre. The defense successfully argued that his mental illness contributed to his deteriorating psychological state, which ultimately drove him to commit the act. As a result, he was found not guilty and was ordered to be placed in a psychiatric hospital. The victims' families felt that the verdict was unjust and did not provide them with a sense of safety. They believed that the perpetrator should be imprisoned. Casey's husband stated that the mentally ill man should be confined until his condition worsened to a point where he could no longer pose a threat. He could remain in the clinic for the rest of his life. 7 months later, Andrew's doctors reported that he was no longer a threat to society due to his rapidly deteriorating mental and physical health. By this point, Andrew was unable to care for himself or even move. It was predicted that he would soon need to be placed on a ventilator as his condition was rapidly deteriorating. On March 7, 2017, Andrew passed away due to illness. It is still unclear whether the illness could have led someone to commit murder or whether it was a clever deception by Andrew and his lawyer. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sharon Pryor. Sharon Pryor was born on February 9, 1959, in Montreal, Canada. Her mother, Yvonne Pryor, is from the UK and her mother's family immigrated to Canada when she was very young. Her mother lived her entire life in Canada, where she met her future husband, George, a serviceman. The couple fell in love, got married, and later welcomed their daughter Sharon. Just before Sharon's second birthday, her mother gave birth to twin girls, Doreen Va Marine, in 1962. Then she had another brother, who was the youngest. In 1965, George was stationed elsewhere in a different location, leading to the couple's decision to divorce. While George continued his military career and moved frequently, Yvonne settled in an apartment in Lang, Canada, provided through a program for military families. This quiet and cozy place seemed perfect for raising her children. Yvonne, Sharon's mother, thought she had found a safe home for her family. But she was unaware that danger could lurk even in such peaceful neighborhoods. From a young age, Sharon is famous for being a very gentle person, beautiful, and caring. She was responsible, sincere, and kind, which drove her to help those in need. Consequently, she often rescued homeless animals, especially those that were sick or injured. This compassion inspired her dream of becoming a veterinarian in the future. Later on, Sharon joined a school club and began playing hockey. She was also very creative, dedicating her free time to art clubs and needlework classes. With her many talents, Sharon appeared to have a bright future ahead. Yvonne was thrilled to see her daughter blossoming into such a wonderful person. As Sharon's assistant, Yvonne was naturally cautious and tried to protect her from negative influences and trouble. Sadly, this caution could not shield Sharon from meeting a cruel man who came into her life. At 16, Sharon is a normal girl facing typical teenage problems. She loved the music of the time and had new hobbies that her parents didn't always support. During this time, she met a young man named John, who had admired her since the 4th grade. Eventually, they started dating in the presence of their friends and were seen as a close-knit and loving couple. Sharon's parents, recognizing their affection for each other, supported their relationship. According to Sharon's mother, they had a harmonious relationship with no conflicts, and Sharon was surrounded by good people. Unfortunately, they were unable to shield her from trouble. On March 29, 1975, everything was going on as usual. Sharon woke up and had breakfast. Her mother was out running errands, having gone to the store the day before Easter to buy food and gifts for her children. When her mother returned home with the shopping, Sharon, the eldest daughter, helped her unpack. This day was meant to be special for the family. Additionally, her mother's boyfriend and his son, Stephen, along with some friends, were planning to visit. Sharon spent most of the day painting Easter eggs and preparing for the holiday. Stephen arrived early and played with her younger brother. Afterward, Sharon got ready to go with Stephen to a sports and crafts association, where they were members. Sharon will go there to get a coat called Garl. This named after the brother of the organization's founder, who died of leukemia. This jacket represented membership in the association, but it wasn't given to everyone. The children had to earn it, for instance, by selling lottery tickets. Sharon was determined to get jacket and had successfully sold enough tickets. Excited, she went to the association to receive her personalized jacket. However, she was disappointed to find that they did not have her size available. As a result, Sharon had to return home empty-handed with Stephen, planning to come back for her jacket another day. Despite her disappointment, Sharon maintained the festive spirit. She joined her mother and boyfriend to help with the final preparations for the gathering. Once the guests arrived, Sharon and her mother hid Easter eggs for the children to find later. Sharon then asked to go to the local pizzeria, Marina, which was popular among teenagers. It was close to home, and her mother often allowed her to go there with friends. This time was no different. After receiving permission, Sharon went to her room to get ready. While Sharon was about to leave, the girl next door came to visit. Everyone chatted while Sharon got ready. She borrowed one of her mother's sweaters and put on her favorite suede jacket. Around 7 p.m., Sharon and her neighbor left the house, but Sharon went to the pizza shop alone because her neighbor changed her mind and didn't want to go anymore. They said their goodbyes. The girl next door went home, while Sharon headed to meet her friends at the pizzeria. A group of teenagers was already there waiting for Sharon, but she didn't arrive on time. The others assumed she was just late because she was with her boyfriend John, so they didn't worry and continued their evening at the pizzeria. At that time, several employees from the company were watching a hockey match at home. After the game ended, they headed to the pizzeria. Among them was John, Sharon's boyfriend, who was there without her and had no idea where she was. Like the others, he expected Sharon to be at the pizzeria by the time they arrived, and her absence worried everyone since she was usually very punctual. Meanwhile, Sharon's mother, Yvonne, was at home putting the younger children to bed and watching TV. She decided to wait a bit longer, thinking that Sharon might have lost track of time while spending time with a friend, and will return home later. She stayed in the living room, watching TV, so she wouldn't miss her daughter's return, but she still hadn't come home. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, Yvonne was overwhelmed with fear because there was still no news about her daughter, Sharon. It was too late to call Sharon's friends, so she had to wait until morning, look out the window occasionally. As dawn approached, Yvonne started calling Sharon's friends to find out where she was. Unfortunately, neither her friends nor John knew her whereabouts. She was deeply troubled to learn that Sharon had never been to the pizza shop that evening. The girl next door confirmed that they had said goodbye to Sharon on the street, and she hasn't seen Sharon since. When Yvonne spoke to Mary, Sharon's best friend, she became even more anxious. Mary said her that after 7 p.m. near the pizzeria, a 20-year-old girl named Cheryl Roy was attacked by a stranger with a knife. Fortunately, other passers-by heard Cheryl's screams, which scared the attacker away. Witnesses reported that the man fled in the direction Sharon would have taken to the pizzeria. They described him as tall, dark-haired, blue-eyed, and mustached. He spoke calmly and wore a ski jacket, blue jeans, and pointed-toe shoes. After hearing this, Yvonne panicked, realizing that the time and location of the attack matched with the route Sharon usually takes. She came to report to the police, but they have yet to come to any conclusions. The police were in no rush to charge anyone in the attack. Instead, they decided to immediately launch a search. Hundreds of people learned about the incident and came out to help search for Sharon, a 16-year-old schoolgirl. They received her photo and description to make the search easier. Her mother, Yvonne, appeared on television to inform everyone about her daughter's disappearance and urged anyone with useful information to contact the police. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, there were no new leads. Days went by without any updates on Sharon's whereabouts, but her mother continued to hope for her daughter's safe return. However, the police had already searched the area, and the chances of finding Sharon alive were dwindling. Sharon had no reason to run away from home. She had a good relationship with her parents and was dating a nice guy at school. Their relationship is built on love and understanding, and he didn't seem like someone who would harm her. Sharon also stayed away from troublemakers, so when she disappeared, the police had no leads or suspects. Attempts to locate a man with a knife seen nearby were unsuccessful. The investigation has not made any new progress in a long time, and Sharon's mother was devastated, but she still hoped for her daughter's safe return. On April 1st, around 6 a.m., Sharon's mother, Yvonne, noticed something unusual through the window. A familiar young man was leaving Sharon's house, crossing the street to retrieve a newspaper left on her doorstep. Sensing something was off, she called out to him, trying to understand why he was up so early and taking newspapers from house to house. He didn't respond and instead quickened his pace to leave. She rushed outside and caught up with him. He tried to keep the newspaper, but she managed to grab it from him. He shouted for her not to look, but she did anyway. On the main page, she was confronted with a heartbreaking photo of a girl's body found in the snow. This incident occurred in the suburbs, just a few minutes' drive from their home. She was not only shocked by the news but also because the police did not inform her, which they should have done. She learned about it later than many neighbors who had seen the latest news in the paper. She convinced herself that it wasn't Sharon but rather another girl who resembled her daughter. After gathering her thoughts, Yvonne called the police to dispute the newspaper's frightening headline. The detectives informed her that they had not yet confirmed if the body belonged to Sharon, which intensified her fear. Feeling overwhelmed, she asked for Sharon's father, George, to come to the area for her since she was in shock. The photograph of the victim bore a striking resemblance to her missing daughter, Sharon, and she was dressed exactly as Sharon's mother had described. When Sharon's father got there, he recognized his daughter, leaving no doubt that the 16-year-old schoolgirl was deceased. A local resident, Jacques, who had also read about the girl's disappearance in the newspaper, discovered the body. Upon recognizing the victim looked like Sharon, he immediately reported the grim discovery. Jacques usually made sure that all his doors were locked, but on Tuesday, he discovered that one lock was open and the door was unlocked. He thought it was strange that there were no signs of a break-in, as if someone had a key. The truth was, he was the only person with full access to the house. When he went outside to the driveway, he was shocked to find a woman's body lying there, naked from the waist down. Additionally, nothing had been taken from his home. Jacques was perplexed about why the body was found in that location. Patrol officers soon arrived, and a murder investigation began. They quickly noted that it was a brutal crime. Sharon had multiple signs of abuse, including bruises and hematomas. She was only wearing a suede jacket and a blue sweater, with her jeans located a few meters away and her underwear caught on a tree. Her mouth was tightly taped, with the tape tangled in her hair. She was gripping the tape in her hand, suggesting she had fought to remove it. There were clear indications that Sharon had attempted to rise, implying she was left alive during the horrific ordeal. Investigators found additional evidence about 15 meters from the body, including tire tracks leading from that spot to where the body lay, along with a trail of blood droplets. No signs of dragging were present. The investigators quickly concluded that multiple individuals may have been involved in this violent act. Sharon's socks and shoes showed no dirt, indicating she did not crawl on the ground by herself. Instead, she was carried out of the car and abandoned in the cold. Near her body, investigators found a man's shirt tied around her wrists, which helped determine the main suspect in the case is quite tall. Additionally, a clear footprint was discovered next to the entry gate post, providing further evidence. They also located a receipt for Garo jacket, which Sharon never received. After a forensic examination, it was determined that Sharon had died only a few hours before her body was found. It was clear she had been held captive for several days, from Saturday to Tuesday. The perpetrator had been extremely cruel, as there were signs of strangulation on her neck, and she had choked on her own blood. Forensic experts found that her ribs were crushed, indicating the killer may have been kneeling on her chest. She also suffered a severe head injury and bleeding from multiple stab wounds. Both sides of her jaw were broken, her nose was fractured, and her cheek was torn by a tooth that had been knocked out from the force of the attack. On April 4, 1975, about 200 friends, relatives, and local residents gathered at a community center. They hoped that the killer would soon be caught. 9 months prior to Sharon's murder, another brutal crime occurred in Canada, the killing of a teenage girl in Châteauguay. 12-year-old Norma O'Brien was murdered on the evening of July 9, 1974. After leaving home to play water polo, she discovered the pool was closed for repairs. Norma returned to the pond, but she never made it back home. That same evening, she was reported missing. The family was convinced that Norma would not have left on her own, so they started looking for her. The next day, her partially clothed body was discovered in a field near the pool. Norma's murder resembled that of Sharon, who was also found in the same area, brutally beaten and strangled. The two crime scenes were approximately a half-hour's drive apart, leading to speculation that they might have been committed by the same individual, although there is no definitive evidence to support this theory. Following Sharon's murder on June 23, 1975, 14-year-old Debbie Fisher disappeared in Châteauguay while riding her red bicycle home. She was later found in the forest, unclothed but without signs of sexual assault. Debbie had died from a blow to the head with a stone. Subsequently, a 17-year-old male suspect confessed to the crime, but his identity is kept private due to his age. The suspect claimed that he was returning home on his moped around 6:30 p.m. when he spotted Debbie riding her bicycle and carrying milk. After observing her closely, he devised a sinister plan. He greeted her, and she responded in kind. He then overtook her, concealed his moped in the bushes, and sat on the curb, pretending to cry. Concerned, Debbie stopped, and the suspect called her over, prompting her to step closer to him. He grabbed her and began to assault her. He threw the milk into the field, and she lost consciousness. Then, he hid her bike in the bushes and attempted to rape her but was unsuccessful. In a fit of rage, he struck her on the head with a rock, causing her death. He concealed her body in an abandoned car in the forest and fled on his moped. Debbie's killer later admitted killing Norma O'Brien, but he denied any involvement in Sharon's killing. He had an alibi at the time of Sharon's murder, so he was not considered a suspect in that case. He was convicted of murdering two girls, Debbie and Norma, and due to his age, served only a few years in prison before being released. He now lives and works in Montreal, near the location where Sharon's body was discovered. Police gathered a significant amount of evidence related to Sharon's murder. However, the outcome was not what they had hoped for. 13 months went by without identifying a primary suspect for charges. They found 38 individuals who might be linked to that tragic night. 6 of these 38 individuals were detained, but ultimately, all were released due to a lack of evidence. Sharon's close friends were also interviewed, and they all had alibis. Some were at a pizzeria, while others were at home watching a game. The investigation became increasingly difficult and gradually reached a dead end as investigators could not find new clues. And it appeared that everyone had given up, except for the mother of Sharon's. Sharon's mother, Yvonne, was frantic as she tried to piece together what had happened to her daughter. Yvonne realized that Sharon couldn't have gone far from home by the time she left the house to go to the pizza shop. On the way, Sharon was supposed to meet a neighbor who was also returning home from work. For years, the neighbor would walk the same path, but that day he claimed he didn't see Sharon on the sidewalk. Since Sharon had not traveled far, she should have been kidnapped right after saying goodbye to her friend. The kidnapper had only a few minutes to act, and somehow he managed to do it without being seen. Unfortunately, there were no witnesses to Sharon's abduction, making it seem like the perfect crime. Sharon's mother believed it was crucial to pay attention to all the neighbors on their street. Someone should have noticed the suspicious stranger or recognized him if he lived nearby. Detectives described the killer and rapist as being around 20 years old, likely living with his parents. They suspected that he had psychological issues, possibly including obsessive behaviors or hostility towards women. The detectives believed this crime was not the first committed by the suspect, and if he wasn't apprehended soon, it wouldn't be the last. They were convinced that several people were involved in both the kidnapping and the subsequent violence. It was also thought that one of the attackers could have been an unpredictable stranger with a knife who initially targeted another girl, Cheryl, but fled when come across by nearby witnesses. Witnesses described the attacker after Cheryl's assault. Despite thorough searches, he could not be found. It was statistically unlikely for two rapists and kidnappers to be active at the same time in one of the city's safest neighborhoods, prompting detectives concluded that the same person was responsible for the attack on Cheryl and the murder of Sharon. The attacker's behavior suggested he knew the area well, allowing him to navigate without leaving evidence or raising suspicion among residents. Detectives, along with Cheryl's mother, concluded that the assailant likely lived nearby. They characterized the attacker as a sadist. Typically, individuals with such tendencies follow a predictable pattern. They seek out compliant victims, initially presenting themselves as charming and sweet to gain trust. Over time, however, they become increasingly cruel and demanding. It all begins with control, followed by humiliation, and then they start mocking the victim. In this context, relationships with women often develop, and the sadist gradually shifts from seeking a partner to becoming a predator on the hunt. As a result, the police decided to thoroughly investigate all local residents with histories of harassment and domestic violence. Their goal was to find and question the knife-wielding attacker who had assaulted Cheryl. He matched the profile of the criminal, socially awkward and resorting to a knife instead of conversation. He was unlikely to be a successful individual or possess high intelligence. This type of person usually had a history of violence and preferred to use brute force to achieve his goals instead of clever tactics or deception. It was clear he lacked self-control, easily losing his temper and being ready to fight at any moment. The most alarming part of this situation is that the police are chasing a suspect who could be a serial killer, who needs to be stopped immediately. While he tried to run away from the detectives, they continued their search for him. Unfortunately, many crucial technologies we have today, such as DNA analysis, surveillance cameras, and phone geolocation, had not yet been developed at that time, leaving the investigators with limited resources. Although detectives investigated quickly and professionally, but 6 years after Sharon's body was found, the killer struck again. A 12-year-old girl named Temi was ferociously murdered. It is believed that the sadistic attacker, after assaulting a 16-year-old named Sharon, began targeting younger girls for his crimes. When Temi's body was discovered, it was revealed that the attacker had grabbed her and started to molest her. Then, he attempted to rape her but was unsuccessful. In a fit of rage, he struck her on the head with a rock, leading to her death. Although detectives investigated quickly and professionally, but 6 years after Sharon's body was found, the killer struck again. The second victim was a 12-year-old schoolgirl named Temi Leakey. She was ferociously murdered. It is believed that after attacking 16-year-old Sharon, the perpetrator chose to target younger girls for his crimes. When Temi's body was found, the same police officers who had been investigating Sharon's murder took on this case. They quickly noticed the similarities between the two murders, which further supported the theory of a serial killer. On March 20, 1981, Temi was visiting her grandmother when she disappeared just a few blocks from her grandmother's house. Later, Temi's mother found her glasses on the sidewalk. When she returned home, the woman immediately reported her daughter missing to the police. They identified a witness who saw a man in a beige raincoat get out of a small red car and force a screaming girl into it. That same evening, Temi was found barely alive on the street. A man came to the police station to report a serious matter. He saw Temi was naked and covered with clothes. Doctors worked hard to save her, but unfortunately, she died. The examination revealed that she had been strangled. Although she was not raped, there were traces of male fluid found on her clothes. The attacker had been careless, leaving behind enough evidence that connected this case to other brutal murders. Despite the detectives' efforts, the investigation hit a dead end. Meanwhile, in nearby areas of Canada, there were reports of similar assaults on girls and young women. In 1971, 17-year-old Lisa Blaze was found dead just a few meters from her home in Montreal. She had left a bar early in the morning, suffered a blow to the head, and was raped. This case has not yet been resolved. Because there are so many open cases, the police have difficulty determining whether these cases are related or not. In 2000, Sharon's mother reached out to the police, requesting a re-evaluation of her daughter's case using modern techniques. At that time, advancements in technology, especially in DNA analysis, had made it possible to investigate cases more effectively. However, a week later, she was disappointed to learn that most of the evidence from the year Sharon was murdered had disappeared. The few surviving items from 1995 included Sharon's clothing and belongings possibly linked to a suspect. Forensic scientists tested a shirt belonging to a man but found that the DNA did not match Sharon. Although no matches were identified in the database, the DNA sample was preserved for future comparisons with any suspects that might emerge later on. In June 2004, the police received a tip about a garage where Sharon might have been held by her killer. When detectives investigated, they found no new evidence. They collected 3 DNA samples from the site, but none matched Sharon's DNA or the materials found on her clothing. Ultimately, this lead turned out to be false. In 2012, a $10,000 reward was offered to anyone with information leading to the arrest of the killer of Sharon. This announcement suggested that the police might have new leads in the case and were seeking help from the public. They established a special hotline to make it easier for people to share information, and the investigation has been reopened. However, like previous efforts, this initiative did not result in any breakthroughs. Detectives revisited the case involving Cheryl's attack in hopes of identifying the perpetrator. They arranged for Cheryl to undergo hypnosis. During the session, she was shown photos of various men, including serial killer William Patrick Fife. She said her attacker looked very similar to William, a Canadian serial killer who was convicted of murdering 5 women in Montreal. He claimed to have had 9 victims, but authorities could only confirm 5. Detectives had long suspected his involvement in the girls' murders and tried to link him to these cases. However, he denied any guilt and claimed he only started killing in 1979. It's important to highlight that Sharon was murdered in 1975. Regrettably, No evidence was found that connected him to the case of Sharon's. Later on, investigators later looked potential connections between the girl's murders and other dangerous criminals in Canada. One suspect was Mike French, a member of the Montreal biker gang Satan. He lived close to Sharon when she was killed in 1975 but moved away with his parents 2 years later. Those who knew him described him as aggressive and cruel, suggesting he could have been responsible for the girls' deaths. Some witnesses reported hearing Mike boast about his involvement in violent acts, but once again, the police faced challenges. Mike was killed in a gang conflict in November, taking with him any potential information about his connection to the murders. His murder also remains unsolved. Ultimately, all these leads were mere speculation. The Sharon family was outraged by the police's lack of professionalism. They committed to fighting for justice until the end, determined to find and hold the criminal accountable. Sharon's mother felt that this fight was not just for her daughter, but also for other parents mourning the loss of their children. In 2015, Sharon's mother was featured on television with 9 other families, accused the police of being unable to handle the case. A new development in the case occurred in June 2022 when a match was found in a DNA database through genetic genealogy. A DNA sample from a man's shirt discovered at the scene of Sharon's murder was matched to Franklin Maywood Romine, who had died in 1982. His body was exhumed for analysis, and DNA confirmation was obtained on May 2, 2023. Franklin resembled the suspect described by witnesses. He lived nearby where the attack occurred, and his car matched the tire tracks found near Sharon's body. He also had a troubled criminal history, including convictions for assault and rape. This evidence was crucial in resolving Sharon's murder case. Although no one could be charged or tried, investigators were able to bring closure to the case. The tragic murder of Sharon Pryor, a 16-year-old schoolgirl, has been solved, thanks to advancements in DNA testing and the determined efforts of her family. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton. Peter Frampton was 24, while Chris Farmer was 25. He had decided to take his girlfriend on an adventure to explore faraway places and celebrate his achievements, while contemplating his future plans. Chris aimed to become a doctor, and he was dedicated to succeeding in that field. Recently, he had earned his medical degree, while his girlfriend, Peter, had graduated from law school. The families of Peter and Chris lived in the suburbs of Manchester, UK. Chris was the middle child among 3 siblings, his youngest sister Penny, his older brother Nigel, and himself. From a young age, Chris disliked restrictions and boundaries, but he was never aggressive or cruel. Instead, he had a free-spirited approach to life. The entire family was friendly and supportive of one another. Chris and Peter had met in school at age 14, and since then, they couldn't imagine life apart. Peter was active but more reserved, which helped balance Chris's enthusiasm. However, Peter and Chris decided to wait until after graduation to get married. Chris felt it was important to establish a stable foundation before starting a family, and Peter agreed with him. The couple loved to party and often took breaks to enjoy themselves. They frequently hosted themed gatherings, inviting many friends and acquaintances. Both had been working since a young age and had achieved financial independence. They held respected jobs, earned good salaries, and were able to travel. By that time, Peter and Chris had already explored Europe, visited Morocco, and traveled to various other destinations. In December 1977, they left their hometown for an adventure. Chris's younger sister, Penny, was envious of their journey. Chris and Peter spent about 6 months in Australia and loved it. They then decided to visit the Pacific Islands, explore the west coast of the United States, and eventually travel to Belize. They craved new experiences and want to live life to the fullest. Chris was passionate about traveling and often recorded video notes during his trips. He sent these videos and letters to his family, letting share in the adventures he had with PETA. On June 13, 1978, Chris' family and PETA's family received an update from them. They shared that they had been offered a short cruise along the coast on an American yacht called Dwayne Boston. This was a wonderful opportunity to enjoy some time on the open sea. Chris had loved sailing since he was young and was always captivated by large bodies of sea. In his letter, he excitedly described Captain Boston, who had 2 children on board named Vince and Russell. The journey was expected to last about 2 weeks. Chris and PETA, a young couple, embarked on a sailing trip with Captain Boston, a seasoned sailor who called himself a pirate of the Caribbean. Chris and PETA were experienced in extreme adventures, and the trip should have been trouble-free. After a while, PETA and Chris' parents became worried because they no longer received any updates about their children. The trip seemed like an exciting opportunity, as Captain Boston's ship, though small, offered a chance to explore the sea and new destinations. PETA and Chris spent their days fishing, relaxing on beaches, and exploring different cities and forests. PETA and Chris's plan was to enjoy their time on the ship and then visit more countries on their own after Captain Boston dropped them off. However, Chris wrote in one of his letters that Captain Boston was very strict, monitoring their work closely and punishing even minor errors. Captain Boston thought this was the best method to train capable sailors and young men. Boston's approach to education differed greatly from that of Chris and PETA, who were often surprised by the strict discipline he enforced. However, they believed that for 2 weeks, serious issues wouldn't arise. Later, one of Captain Boston's children recalled that, at the start of the journey, everything felt quite normal. But as the ship became cramped and minor disagreements occurred, tensions grew to the point where the adults could barely tolerate each other. The children Vince and Russell also frequently argued over minor matters, while their father, Boston, appeared to be disengaged. Chris informed his relatives that their plans had slightly changed. They now decided to land in Livingston, Guatemala, which meant they would finish their trip earlier than expected. After that, PETA planned to fly to New Orleans, while Chris intended to travel to Trinidad. Chris expressed dissatisfaction with the small yacht trip, suggesting that they were growing weary of seeing the sea every day. Additionally, the boat's limited space prevented them from maintaining distance from other passengers, causing irritation among everyone involved in the journey. However, PETA and Chris continued their journey, sailing around various islands, which made their experience more enjoyable. One morning around 11 o'clock, they landed on an island and went to visit the local lighthouse. There was a party there, complete with a barbecue and plenty of drinks, and everyone joined in the festivities. This turned out to be their last happy memory before something tragic happened. Then, PETA also wrote and sent letters to her relatives along with Chris. In her last letter, she mentioned that life on the boat wasn't always easy. Captain Boston frequently scolded his sons and had a quick temper. At that time, there were no mobile phones or fast communication methods, so it took about 2 weeks for letters to be delivered. Unfortunately, after PETA stopped receiving letters from Chris, she also stopped writing them. PETA and Chris' parents do not understand what happened to their children. The situation was complicated by bureaucracy. During this time, Guatemala was experiencing a civil war. Although Livingston was distant from the main conflict, it is still dangerous for foreigners because of the many gangs operating here, of which drug trafficking is a big problem. Due to the families of PETA and Chris were deeply worried. In Guatemala, dense jungles made it easy to get lost or to fall victim to gang attacks. It was common for individuals to disappear entirely. In such case, kidnappings were frequent, and for a foreigner, simply getting lost in the jungle usually means will die. PETA's family and Chris's family searched for any leads to find their missing children. They sent numerous letters and appeals across Central America, reaching out to city officials and medical centers, but they received no useful information. It was as if their children had vanished completely. Peta's family and Chris's family were devastated when they could not find any information about their loved ones for 6 months. They then hired a private detective in Belize, who took on the case and quickly established contact with a Catholic priest in Guatemala. The priest revealed that the bodies of a young man and a young woman of European descent had been discovered the previous summer. There were suspicions that these could be the remains of Chris and Peta. Any hope that Peta and Chris were still alive seemed to have been completely dashed. In August of the 1970s, fishermen discovered 2 bodies about 200 meters from the shore. The bodies had drowned, and their hands and feet were tied to prevent them from floating. They were also attached to engine parts, and plastic bags were found over their heads. It was clear that their deaths were violent rather than accidental, as a forensic expert identified signs of severe beatings and torture. The examination revealed that the victims were still alive when they were thrown into the water. This is a huge blow to the Peta family and the Chris family. They had suspected that the bodies belonged to their missing relatives, Peta and Chris. 6 months earlier, at the time of the discovery, the identities of the victims from the massacre were still unknown. They were ultimately buried in a standard Guatemalan grave marked with white crosses. To identify the victims, their bodies needed to be exhumed and compared with dental records from the UK. Implementing this process in Guatemala is very difficult, leading the relatives of Peta and Chris to attempt sending the remains back to the UK for examination by more experienced forensic experts. However, they encountered issues such as translation problems, bureaucratic obstacles, and indifference from local authorities. Ultimately, the victims were identified as Chris Farmer and Peta Frampton using the dental records sent to Guatemala, but the process took an excessive amount of time. Sadly, the family's struggles continued as they sought answers about who could have harmed their children. Chris and Peta were happy and friendly people, and their relatives could not fathom why they had died. Sadly, the truth behind this tragedy was only uncovered 37 years later. Detectives from both the UK and the US investigated the case, but they were unable to find any leads. In the 1980s, British police officially closed the case without notifying Chris and Peta's families. Penny, the younger sister of Chris, wrote letters to he for 4 years, sending birthday and Christmas wishes, but received no response. This situation deeply affected both families, Peta and Chris, who lost their son and daughter. They consistently reached out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, newspapers, consulates, and police, seeking justice and updates on the investigation. Sadly, Chris's father and Peta's parents never received any answers and passed away before the case was resolved. In 2015, Chris's sister, younger Penny, decided to take charge of the investigation. She developed skills in online detective work. However, she had very little information about Chris' journey, except for the ship he has gone on at the time. Eventually, Penny located Boston, the captain of a sailing ship named Justin B., on which Chris and Peta has gone traveling before the tragic incident occurred. Penny pieced together limited information from Chris' letters. According to the letters, Chris and Peta detailed their plans to travel along the Caribbean coast with an American sailor and his 2 sons, aiming to reach Honduras. Boston, a native of Sacramento, California, was the last person to see Chris and Peta alive. In their last letters, Penny sensed tension between Chris, Peta, and Boston, leading to suspicions that Boston could be the killer. However, there was no solid evidence to support these claims. While walking her dogs, Penny suddenly had a realization about what she needed to do. She had previously created an anonymous social media account to monitor her 3 sons for safety reasons. This time, it dawned on her that she could use this account to gather evidence against Boston. She also felt it was essential to find Boston's sons, Vince and Russell, as she suspected they were involved in the murder of Chris and Peter. Penny located the accounts of both brothers, Vince, 13, and Russell, 12, at the time Chris and Peter were murdered. She confronted them, mentioning that her loved ones had died on Boston's ship and demanded answers. Russell ignored her. However, after speaking with Vince, who was more open to discussing the matter, she became convinced that the brothers Vince and Russell were themselves deeply troubled by the killings of Chris and Peter. Vince explained that their father, Boston, was a cruel alcoholic who abused them. During the trip with Chris and Peter, he got drunk and killed them both, and it felt like a scene from a horror movie. Penny encouraged Vince to go to the Sacramento police station to testify. He appreciated Penny's persistence, feeling that it was finally time to tell the truth. Following her advice in October 2015, Vince viewed the confession as a long-anticipated relief. For many years, Vince experienced nightmares about this incident. His father, Boston, was a dangerous man who committed numerous brutal crimes. However, the most terrible thing, Vince lived with this secret for nearly 4 decades, torn between his fear of his father and his desire to expose the truth. He had previously informed his grandmother and the police about the murder his father committed, but they either dismissed him or ignored his claims. Now, however, his statements had convinced the police, causing them to conduct an investigation into archived documents from 37 years ago. As a result, the police in Manchester and the United States launched an investigation. By 2016, Boston was charged with double murder. Vince reported that he witnessed the murders of Chris and Peter, and his younger brother, Russell, who was 12 years old at the time of Chris and Peter's disappearance, also provided detailed accounts of what happened. Vince described how Boston brutally beat Chris, stripped him, tied him up, and attached many heavy parts of the car that were later found on the ship. When Boston pushed Chris over the side of the ship, he was still alive, but that didn't stop Boston. Afterward, he went down to the lower deck, where screams could be heard for a long time. Later, Chris was thrown overboard, tied up and naked, and drowned in deep waters, leaving no chance for survival. In his interview, Vince shared his experiences of living under the oppressive rule of his tyrannical father, Boston. While other fathers played with their children, took them on outings, and rode bicycles, Vince's father involved him in criminal activities, such as robberies. He intended to use his children to break into homes and harm people. However, Vince and Russell refused to participate, which only led to even harsher punishments from there. Vince felt relieved that, after many years of being overlooked, people finally listened to and believed him. At the time of the online investigation, he was 50 years old. Initially, he was too afraid to discuss the murder with anyone, not even his younger brother, Russell, who also witnessed it. Their father, Boston, had threatened them, saying that if they went to the police station, he would die. He justified his actions by claiming he had no choice, otherwise, Chris and Peter can report him, so he needed to eliminate them. Boston believed that informers were the worst kind of people. He worried about what would happen if Vince and Russell ever revealed what they had seen. Who would be the next victim? The threats and intimidation Vince and Russell faced deeply affected them. They had grown up under the oppressive control of an alcoholic father who instilled fear in them and kept them quiet. Despite this, Boston's eldest son, Vince, wanted to speak out and tried to do so as soon as he escaped from his father's grasp. Vince noted that as an adult, he repeatedly reported the incident to the police, but his pleas were ignored and even mocked. At first, Penny believed Boston's children were involved in the crime. However, she soon realized they were actually victims of a criminal who had been tormenting them for years. Vince and Russell found themselves in a desperate situation, and Peter's fate was sealed as soon as they got on the ship. Records show they were misled into boarding under the false belief that Captain Boston was offering cruises called Robinson Crusoe. At first, life on the ship was enjoyable. The young passengers loved sailing and treated each other kindly. The Captain Boston took them to beautiful, remote locations, and they thought this journey would be a memorable adventure on their small vessel. However, the ship and its Captain Boston were not what they appeared. He took Chris and Peter on this trip to escape from the law. He wanted to avoid facing charges for a rape he had committed in California, so he fled to Belize. To the criminal Boston, Chris and Peter looked like a great opportunity for easy money. From the beginning, he planned to dock at a remote harbor to rob them and steal their belongings. As the police investigated this frightening man further, Boston, they discovered that he was likely involved in multiple murders. He had long been the main suspect in the disappearance of his third wife, Mary Lou, who vanished after expressing her desire for a divorce and wanting to take their two sons, Vince and Russell, with her. Vince, the couple's son, recalled that his mother disappeared in 1968 when he was just 3 years old. The children deeply missed their mother and were forced to live with their abusive father. As Vince grew older, he came to understand the terrible nature of his father, who had killed a couple of travelers without remorse, and he began to suspect that Boston was also responsible for his mother's disappearance. Boston had a motive for Mary's murder. He wanted to avoid divorce, the division of assets, custody battles, and alimony payments. Vince and Russell's grandmother told them that Boston had shot Mary in the back, but it was unclear where she got this information, and Mary's body was never found. Ultimately, Boston's involvement in Mary's disappearance could not be proven due to lack of evidence. The brothers Vince and Russell often sought answers about their mother's, Mary's fate, but their father was reluctant to discuss it. During his childhood, whenever they brought up the subject, he would harshly punish them, which instilled a lasting fear in them about bringing up the topic. Boston's children, Vince and Russell, described their childhood as walking on a knife's edge. Boston was often drunk and could become aggressive, and when he used drugs, his behavior became erratic. This led to harsh punishments for the children. They were reprimanded for even minor missteps. For them, the boat trip was one of the most terrifying experiences of their lives, as they feared they might suffer the same fate as their mother, Mary. However, during the trip, Vince fondly recalled Chris, who had taken the time to teach the boys new things. Since their mother's disappearance, they had not encountered such kindness in a long time. Boston was different around new people. He was charming, cheerful, and the life of the party. However, this changed when he became uncomfortable with strangers and began punishing his children again. For a while, Peter and Chris stayed silent and did not get involved in parenting issues because Boston insisted that his sons needed strict discipline. One day, Boston got drunk and started to physically abuse his two sons, Vince and Russell. This behavior outraged Chris, who could no longer stay quiet. He confronted Boston and criticized him for his cruelty. At that moment, Boston, still intoxicated, attempted to hit Chris, but Chris managed to dodge, causing Boston to fall overboard. Although he was helped back onto the boat, he held a deep grudge against Chris from that point on. Atmosphere tension and uncertainty filled the after the incident. Boston felt compelled to take revenge because he thought Chris had insulted him. The following day, the couple Peter and Chris requested to be dropped off on shore. However, Boston attacked Chris from behind while he was distracted. He caught Chris off guard and struck him in the head with a single blow. Boston then delivered several powerful punches to Chris's chest and bound his hands and feet. Boston went down to the lower deck, where he knocked down and tied up Peter. The next day, he tortured and abused Peter and Chris, forcing Vince and Russell to take care of they. Vince and Russell were confused and didn't know what to do. They wanted to help Chris and Peter but were scared for their own safety. PETA asked Vince and Russell for assistance, but they did nothing. Despite the situation, Chris remained brave and did not cry. Days later, Boston announced PETA and Chris would be released on the shore. They were thrilled, thinking their suffering was coming to an end. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a cruel trick. After reaching deeper waters, he placed plastic bags over PETA and Chris' heads, tied them up, and then threw them overboard. It was essential to apprehend Boston, a brutal killer. Investigators discovered that he had sailed away from the coast of Guatemala on July 19. Only his sons, Vince and Russell, were left behind. After the incident, he returned to Sacramento and sold the yacht. During this time, he contacted authorities, claiming he had dropped off PETA and Chris near Livingston. He accused them of drug trafficking and using illegal drugs during their trip, which caused problems in Guatemala. However, the family of PETA and Chris knew that them relatives didn't use drugs. Despite this, Boston disappeared and could not be found due to bureaucratic complications, leaving the case unresolved. Sadly, the case never went to trial. Boston was eventually found in a nursing home in Eureka, California, and was arrested on December 1, 2016. While awaiting a hearing, he faced several health issues. Just weeks before Penny and her mother were set to fly to the U.S. for the hearing, Boston's health rapidly declined. In April 2017, at the age of 75, Boston died in custody. An autopsy revealed heart and liver problems. Medical staff at the prison hospital reported that after Boston learned about the upcoming hearings, he refused to take his prescribed medications, which worsened his condition. The penitentiary labeled Boston as a coward who chose to end his life rather than confront the repercussions of the massacre he planned. Chris's family had hoped for justice to be served quickly, but the Supreme Court let them down. By this time, PETA's parents had passed away and they did not get to see the case solved. Eventually, Penny wrote a book about her brother, Chris, who was an extraordinary person and made a meaningful impact, even at a young age. In 2019, she traveled to Guatemala to visit the graves marked with white crosses where PETA and Chris were buried. Penny wept for her brother and for his girlfriend, who had stood by his side until the very end. This journey was difficult but helped her to confront her fears and pain. Chris's relatives continue to remember him, as he had aspirations of becoming a doctor and brought great pride to his family. His mother lived to be 99 years old and often felt it was unjust that her son was taken from her at the young age of 25. She often expressed that she would gladly trade several years of her life for him, believing he would have accomplished something extraordinary during that time. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Matthew Eapen. Sunil and Deborah got married in 1990 after meeting in medical college. Sunil, from Chicago, USA, followed his father's path and became an anesthesiologist, while Deborah worked as an ophthalmologist. Their first child, Brendan, was born in 1994, and their second child, Matthew, born May 24, 1996. They are young parents working in the medical field. They face significant challenges balancing their careers and family life. Both came from respected families with successful backgrounds in education and medicine, motivating them to achieve similar success. They lived in a prestigious area of Boston, Massachusetts, in a lovely home and were financially comfortable enough to hire a nanny. The nanny became like a family member, handling both childcare and household duties, and lived on their property. Deborah soon returned to work part-time, having completed advanced training courses during her pregnancy. Balancing her professional responsibilities with family care was difficult and stressful. The high workload placed on the nannies often led to them leaving due to stress or being dismissed if they couldn't meet the family's expectations. Before hiring 18-year-old Louise Woodward from Cheshire, Great Britain, they used to employ 3 other nannies. Louise lived with her family until she turned 18, then decided to take a gap year in the United States before continuing her education. Although she didn't have formal training, she loved children and got along well with them. She registered as a nanny and housekeeper with a recruiting agency, which helped her move to Boston and find a job. In December 1996, she started working for the Sunil family, whose youngest child, Matthew, was only 8 months old. She had no prior experience with infants, including changing diapers, and had only 3 days of training before she began her job. Louise was given the responsibility of caring for Matthew and 2 years old, Brendan, and assisting with household chores. She quickly found the workload overwhelming due to the family's busy daily routine. All this workload went against Louise's plans, as she had come to the USA seeking adventure and enjoyment, not to work without any days off. She initially thought that being a nanny would provide her with a livelihood without much responsibility. However, looking after children aged 8 months and 2 years truly requires experience, training, and a sense of responsibility. It is challenging to expect an 18 years old to have such expertise without proper training. Despite this, Sunil and Deborah, who were desperate for help, accepted Louise since they needed a nanny housekeeper. Furthermore, her services were affordable. However, Louise's behavior did not meet the family's high standards, so they gave her a list of rules to follow. As a young nanny, she had little choice because previous failures with other families had put her at risk of being dismissed by the agency. She needed to keep her job to maintain her income. It was challenging for her to suppress her youthful, free spirit, as she preferred to walk, chat with friends, and attend parties rather than focus on work. Occasionally, she would wander around Boston and indulge in her dreams. However, she started refusing work more often, frequently asking for time off, and spending a lot of time on herself. She began taking daily walks, returning late in the evening, regularly attending parties, and struggling to wake up in the morning, often sleeping until nearly lunchtime. This behavior disappointed the Epens, as she would spend hours chatting with her family in the UK, neglecting her responsibilities with the children. One day, Deborah came home from work earlier than usual and found the children sleeping at home alone without any supervision. Later, the nanny Louise returned from a party. There were suspicions that similar incidents had occurred before. Naturally, Sunil and Deborah felt worried about their children and they were not happy with her. They spoke to her and imposed a curfew, but it didn't solve the problem. They were very unhappy with her behavior and felt they weren't getting their money's worth for services. Although they still wanted to trust her, they saw her as lazy and irresponsible. So, the relationship which she began to significantly deteriorate a few days before the unfortunate incident. She openly told Sunil that she didn't enjoy being a nanny and didn't want children because it was difficult, yet she pleaded not to be fired because she desperately needed the job. Sunil made more rules to discipline her, to get the nanny at the level they desired. On February 3, 1997, Deborah informed Louise that she could leave if anything was not to her liking. However, Louise, the nanny, resisted the idea, insisting there was no need to rush and that she was willing to accept and adhere to their new, stricter conditions. They agreed but mentioned they needed to change the children's sleep schedule by limiting sleep after 3 p.m. to prevent disrupting their nighttime rest. This change was not aimed at Louise personally but was necessary to reorganize the children's daily routine. Shortly after this, a terrible tragedy occurred. The tragedy happened just 10 weeks after Louise began her job. On February 4, 1997, Louise woke the children up in the morning after the parents left for work. She mentioned that Matthew was unusually fussy and cried a lot from the start of the day. Louise bathed him and then put him back to bed to calm him down. At 3:15 p.m., she went to wake him up from his nap and noticed he was breathing weakly and irregularly. She took him to the living room to perform CPR, but he remained unconscious. Initially, she couldn't reach Sunil and Deborah and only called 911 at 3:45 p.m. to report that Matthew, the 8-month-old, was not breathing. Louise informed the coordinator that the baby might have choked on vomit because his face was turning blue. Emergency services arrived quickly. The child was alive but in critical condition. The doctors rushed him to the children's hospital, where they found that Matthew had much more severe injuries than initially reported. Matthew, an 8-month-old baby, was found to have a 10-centimeter crack at the base of his skull, bleeding in his eyes, a hematoma between the skull and brain, and bleeding in his neck and back of the brain. He also had a broken wrist, and vomit was found in his trachea. He was urgently taken to the operating room for brain surgery and connected him to a life support machine because he was in a coma. Experienced doctors suggested that these injuries were caused by being violently shaken and hit on the head. In pediatrics, this is known as shaken baby syndrome. Babies are born with disproportionately large heads and weak neck muscles, making them vulnerable to injury when shaken. The unfixed head will dangle when shaken, causing damage to brain cell membranes and brain injury. When a baby is shaken, the brain moves back and forth inside the skull, leading to swelling and bleeding. Adults often shake babies out of frustration when they cry, not realizing it won't calm them down but will make them cry more. Continued shaking can cause severe injuries or even be fatal. Most cases occur in children up to 2 years old, but even a 4-year-old can suffer greatly from such shaking. Around 4 p.m., Deborah, Matthew's mother, noticed she had missed a call from Louise at 3:15 p.m. and also saw an urgent text message from she. Concerned, she left her patient at the hospital and called she, who explained the situation. Deborah was furious. She asked for leave from work and rushed to the hospital where Matthew was admitted. On the way, she prayed that her son would be okay. Upon arrival, she informed the doctors of her medical expertise, as she was an ophthalmologist, and asked to examine her baby. She quickly discovered severe Matthew's eye hemorrhaging. Meanwhile, the doctors alerted the police about the baby's serious injuries, prompting law enforcement to visit the Eapen family home to question the nanny. Louise was at home, looking upset and concerned, with Brendan. She explained that Matthew had been irritable and difficult since the morning, and despite her efforts to calm him, nothing worked. By the end of the conversation, she confessed to possibly being a bit harsh with him. Overwhelmed by his continuous crying and screaming, she shook him to try to soothe him, but it was ineffective. In frustration, she threw him onto a pile of towels on the bed. While taking him to the bathroom, she accidentally dropped him, which caused him to hit his head on the floor. Her account was alarming, given the severity of Matthew's injuries. The following day, the police arrested Louise on charges of assaulting a child. Matthew's condition was not improving, and doctors were sure he had no hope of recovery. The brain injury was so severe that, even if he survived, he would be paralyzed for life. Sunil and Deborah, who were also medically educated, understood this. On February 9, 1997, they made the difficult decision to disconnect Matthew from life support, worsening Louise's situation as she was accused of murder. She was denied bail before the trial, but continued to insist on her innocence, maintaining it was a tragic accident. Before the trial on May 7, 1997, Louise agreed to take a polygraph test. During the test, she was asked if she had caused physical harm to Matthew on that day. She denied causing any injury, and a lie detector expert concluded her answers were truthful with 95% confidence. Another expert, hired by her lawyers, also confirmed that she answered all questions truthfully. On October 7, 1997, a trial began in Cambridge, Massachusetts, involving many medical experts, including neurosurgeons, pediatricians, ophthalmologists, and pathologists, all of whom were familiar with similar crimes. In the courtroom, there was extensive discussion about Matthew's injuries and Louise's behavior. Most experts believed that his injuries were caused by abuse and violence. Many doubted Louise's statement that she had accidentally hit the boy's head, noting that the injuries showed signs of blunt force trauma. The child had probably been severely and brutally beaten, and the injuries appeared fresh. An expert for the prosecution initially compared Matthew's injury to those from a fall from the second floor, but this statement was later withdrawn. The defense argued that Matthew's head and wrist injuries occurred weeks prior to the incident, before the nanny was in their home. The lawyer suggested that the child's parents, Sunil and Deborah, could have been involved in neglect or abuse. In court, Louise stated that she had not noticed any injuries to Matthew's head or arm. She explained that her interaction with the child was mild, but it caused the reopening of an old injury, leading to bleeding. She mentioned that the day before the tragic incident, the child fell near the stairs and hurt himself, which might have aggravated the injury. Louise clarified that her use of British English was misunderstood. When she said popped, she meant she placed the child on the bed, not through him, as might be interpreted in American English, and she denied dropping the baby in the bathtub. The defense argued that if the prosecution's claim of cruel treatment were true, Matthew would have had serious bruises and hematomas on the head and body, which were not present. This suggests that the child might have been shaken to calm him down, but not to the extent the prosecution claimed. Louise, in an emotional outburst, lost control and shook the child, causing old injuries to resurface. Witnesses and experts testified that there was no fresh bleeding in the brain, indicating that the skull fracture was an older injury. However, Sunil and Deborah denied that Matthew had suffered such a traumatic brain injury. The defense suggested that these actions might have been driven by fear, as Louise panicked while trying to revive the child. Unfortunately, Brendan could not testify at the trial because he was too young to understand what had happened. During the trial, Louise acted inappropriately. She occasionally smirked and laughed, which was attributed to nervous shock. At the time, she was reportedly only 18 years old, and the incident described triggered such a reaction. Additionally, she retracted her initial testimony obtained by detectives during the first interview. She did not mention how challenging it was to work for the Eapen family, who overwhelmed her with childcare and household duties, for which she was unprepared. She had come to the United States to relax and have fun. Despite this, she insisted that she never mistreated the children. She claimed she would never harm a child, especially to the extent of causing serious injuries that led to a coma and could paralyze an 8-month-old baby. Louise's relatives from the UK spoke at the trial, praising her as a gentle and reserved person. They described her as an obedient parishioner of a local church, a vegetarian, and a clarinet player. However, her friends from the US had a different view, seeing her as a party girl who never missed a chance to go out. 3 of her friends testified at the trial, as well as former employers who had let her go due to incompetence and irresponsibility. The prosecution highlighted that she tried to wake Matthew 15 to 20 times but found the boy wasn't breathing. She attempted to help him and called his parents, but they didn't answer. It took her half an hour to finally call 911. The prosecutor questioned why she delayed calling for emergency help when immediate action was needed. She explained that she was panicking and stressed, trying hard to manage the situation on her own. Throughout the trial, Louise showed little emotion. She occasionally smiled but never expressed regret for what happened. She spoke fondly of Brendan and Matthew, she describing Brendan as smart and talkative, and Matthew as a sweet, smiling, and playful child. The trial was broadcast live on British television, capturing the attention of almost the entire country, with many people supporting she. On October 30, 1997, a jury found Louise Woodward guilty of second-degree murder. She begged the judge to lighten her sentence. She begged them not to let her spend the rest of her life in prison for something she didn't do. However, the judge ignored her pleas. Louise was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Upon hearing the sentence, she burst into tears, unable to believe what was happening. She questioned the judge, insisting that she hadn't done anything wrong and sincerely hoped for an acquittal. Her mother supported her, stating in court that a terrible judicial error had occurred. She argued that her daughter could not have harmed a defenseless child and that she was innocent and did not deserve such a harsh punishment. In fact, the jury's opinions were mixed. Many people believe that Louise is innocent in Matthew's death, attributing it to an old injury. However, after further deliberation, the jury concluded she was guilty. It later emerged that those who initially supported acquittal were persuaded to vote guilty. This thing sparked significant public outcry in both the United States and Louise's home country, Britain. Many people in the UK donated funds to assist Louise and her family, totaling about $500,000. Additionally, there were mass protests from supporters who believed Louise was an innocent victim of the US legal system. This public pressure led to the conviction being overturned by the judge 10 days later. By then, Louise had already spent about 8 months in prison. After reviewing the case materials, the new judge concluded that Louise's actions were due to her inexperience and immaturity, not malicious intent, and that murder was not her purpose. Louise was sentenced to the time she had already spent in prison awaiting trial, which was 289 days, allowing her to be immediately released. Her supporters celebrated her release like a holiday. Meanwhile, the death of Matthew, the 8-month-old child, was largely overlooked. Even if his death wasn't her fault, his parents sought justice for their child, and the prosecutor was determined to see Louise imprisoned for a longer period. He noted that he had recently been involved in a trial where a father was accused of killing a child in a similar case, and that father remained in prison. He questioned why Louise, a nanny, was released, viewing it as unfair and contradictory given the prevalence of similar cases in U.S. judicial practice. Louise was released from prison after serving less time than it took. She returned to her hometown in the UK in 1998 and enrolled in the Faculty of Law at London South Bank University. She explained that her interest in law developed during the trial, as she engaged deeply with legal matters to better understand the proceedings. Thus, choosing law as a profession felt natural and obvious to her. While pursuing her studies, Louise decided to fulfill another dream, learning to dance. She took salsa lessons and later opened her own dance school, becoming a dance instructor. Her classes included children, often accompanied by their mothers, who were comfortable with her past and aware of the accusations against her. In 2002, Louise graduated with honors from university and began working as a lawyer. However, a year later, she left her law firm to return to her dance studio. She then married businessman Anthony Elkis, who worked in cargo transportation, and they had a daughter. By 2014, Louise had authored several books and participated in numerous interviews about past incident. In all interviews, she has insisted that she was wrongly accused of Matthew's death. She insisted she had no intention to harm and believed her arrest was unjust. She remarked that the U.S. judicial system often demands accountability, suggesting that if the parents weren't blamed, the suspicion fell on her. Still, she expressed relief and gratitude that the judicial system ultimately resolved the case, leading to her release. Louise, now 45 years old, continues to live a normal life without feeling guilty about the past, and many people support her in this. In one of her interviews, she stated that she had the right to enjoy her life. Meanwhile, the parents of Matthew, Deborah, and Sunil faced public outrage. People criticized them for prioritizing their careers over spending time with their children, questioning why they hired an inexperienced young nanny who was not equipped to care for small children. Despite knowing this, they were attracted because the cost of hiring her would be very low and burdened her with excessive responsibilities. The 18-year-old nanny, Louise, received only 3 days of training before being overwhelmed with numerous restrictions and rules. Due to public pressure, the Epen family had to relocate to a new, undisclosed address. It is known that they now have 2 more children and no longer hire nannies, with Deborah taking on the responsibility of raising the children herself. They established the Matthew Epen Foundation at Boston Children's Hospital to enhance child safety and well-being by educating the public about the dangers of shaking a baby and providing support to victims and their families. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Corey Richins. The death of a loved one is a devastating tragedy that deeply impacts family members and children. Each person handles the loss in their own way, trying to deal with the blow of fate. To cope with this shock, Corey Richins, a woman, wrote an entire book. It seemed that she, more than anyone else, understood the depth of what happened. However, as the police delved deeper into the tragic death of a man from Utah, it became increasingly clear that there was more cynicism. Eric Richins was born in 1982 as the eldest of 3 children, with 2 younger sisters, Katie and Amy. He shared a special bond with Katie. The family lived in Summit County, Utah, where they were well known and wealthy, thanks to their cattle ranch. Many buildings in the town still bear the family's last name. Despite their prominence, the Eric were humble and kind, and they were respected by everyone who knew them. Eric grew up on his parents' farm, where he participated in sports and helped with chores. His family was part of the Mormon Church, and religion played a major role in Eric's life. He spent 2 years on a mission trip to Mexico City, where he demonstrated good character by helping the community. Upon his return, Eric attended the University of Utah, where he earned a bachelor's degree in international law. During this period, Eric began dating Julia Jurgensen. They married when Eric was just 20 years old. However, due to their youth and desire for independence, they couldn't maintain the marriage and decided to divorce. After his studies and the failed marriage, Eric saw promising opportunities to start a construction business, which he began to pursue. Eric frequently visited the Home Depot store, where he enjoyed chatting with the cashiers while waiting for his order. During his visits, he noticed a charming cashier named Corey, who was widely considered one of the most beautiful women in town. Eric was captivated by her beauty and secretly in love with her. But he hesitated to ask her out because he was still dealing with the emotional and financial fallout from his difficult divorce. Eric's celibacy continued for a while, but eventually, he asked Corey out, and she agreed. Their first date was filled with laughter and fun. They got along well, and their relationship developed quickly. The couple was truly happy despite their significant difference in social status. Eric was always cheerful and sociable, able to cheer her up on Corey's worst days. Despite the shock from his first marriage, Eric quickly realized that Corey was the one for him and soon proposed. She accepted, and after a whirlwind romance, they got married in 2013. Corey was not only beautiful but also intelligent. She attended her chosen university and earned a bachelor's degree in health management, followed by a master's degree. Corey had previously worked as an administrator at a design agency before meeting Eric in a hardware store. Corey became a new ray of light and hope for him, giving him confidence that he could build a loving family. Corey was born in 1990 in an ordinary family. Corey has an older brother and an older sister. Her father died at the age of 57 in 2010 after struggling with alcoholism. He was unable to witness Corey's wedding, which took place 3 years after his death. Before the wedding, Eric's mother insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect her son from experiencing another shock like his previous divorce. At that time, Eric's business share was worth about $2.5 million. His mother presented the agreement as a precaution in case of divorce. According to the prenup, Corey could not claim Eric's money, and he could not claim hers. Eric arranged for Corey and partner Cody to be the beneficiaries on his life insurance policy. In the event of his death, Cody could use his portion of the insurance payout to buy out Eric's share of their business. After their wedding, Eric and Corey began their ideal life together. They bought their home, lived happily, and hoped to have children. Inspired by her successful brother who had made a fortune buying, renovating, and selling houses, Corey decided to follow the same path. With Eric's experience in the construction industry, Corey obtained her real estate broker's license and began selling real estate. Her friendly nature and attractive appearance quickly made her a well-known real estate broker in town, which made Eric proud. Eventually, Corey shared her brother's business model with Eric and they began working together. Corey identified profitable properties for resale, Eric managed the renovations, and they sold the homes. Their business flourished until a couple sued Corey for failing to disclose the true condition of a home. The lawsuit was settled out of court and did not affect their business. After 9 years of marriage, they have 3 sons, Weston, Carter, and Ashton. Despite his busy work schedule, Eric values family time, being actively involved in his sons' lives and supporting them in sports. Since 2020, things have been unusual in their relationship. While on vacation in Greece, Eric called younger sister Amy and said Corey had given him a drink that made him feel sick. He suspected she was trying to poison him and warned that if he suddenly died, Corey would be responsible. Although the family was concerned, they dismissed Eric's claims as paranoid because the couple seemed happy. After the vacation, Eric secretly changed his will in November 2020, leaving his business shares and assets to younger sister Katie without telling Corey. The couple continued to live together for another 1.5 years until early 2022. This time, the conflict was over Corey's desire to buy an unfinished mansion for $2 million, which she thought could be sold for $5 million after renovations. Eric is skeptical about the deal's profitability, causing tension between them. Corey accuses Eric of controlling her business, while he believes the investment is too risky. Around this time, Cody, Eric's business partner, was notified by the insurance company that Corey had tried to change the beneficiary on Eric's life insurance policy to her name. Although she was unsuccessful, this raised serious concerns about her intentions. Eric started considering divorce, knowing that Corey would lose everything due to their marriage contract. Eric had already transferred his share to younger sister and removed Corey's name from all documents, including the insurance policy. Meanwhile, Corey spent $1,000 on powerful and dangerous painkillers. On Valentine's Day 2022, Eric told Cody that after eating a sandwich Corey made, he suffered severe respiratory irritation, similar to an earlier incident in Greece. Despite his suspicions, Eric did not leave Corey's side or stop eating her food. Eric continued to be suspicious of Corey, especially after he refused to buy the mansion. On the night of March 4th, Eric, 39, was found dead in his bed. The night before, Corey had made Eric a Moscow Mule over dinner. After he finished drinking it, they went to bed. During the night, Corey woke up to comfort one of their sons, who had been having a nightmare. When she returned to the bedroom around 3 a.m., she found Eric cold and unresponsive. She called 911, saying that Eric had no signs of life and that her attempts to resuscitate him had failed. Paramedics confirmed Eric's death, and Corey mentioned that she had attempted CPR on him, but doctors doubted her story. The man was bleeding from his mouth, but his wife had no blood on her. His death appeared to be due to a drug overdose, as tests showed his blood levels were 5 times higher than the lethal dose. When Corey was asked why he was taking such a strong drug, she said she didn't know. Eric's family denied that he had any health problems that would warrant such medication. A review of his medical history revealed that he had not seen a doctor in a long time and that no one had prescribed him this hard-to-get prescription drug. Eric had no history of drug addiction or convictions and was otherwise healthy. Just one day after Eric's death, a dispute broke out between Curry and Katie. Curry discovers that all of her husband's businesses and assets are legally Katie's, leaving Curry with nothing. This revelation caused Curry to become aggressive, and she attacked Katie, leading to the police being called. Unwilling to back down, Curry filed a lawsuit, claiming that the prenuptial agreement had been violated. She argued that her name could not be removed from the will and insurance policy without her consent. Curry asked for her rightful share and $300,000 in attorney's fees. In response, Katie took legal action against Curry, suspecting foul play in her brother's death and accusing Curry of poisoning her brother for financial gain. Police began investigating Eric's death and suspected it was not an accident. Curry was the prime suspect. During the investigation, police requested access to Curry's cell phone. They discovered that messages with Neil, the salesman, had been deleted, but police were able to recover them. Curry said her husband's death was a huge loss for her, and was especially difficult for Eric's 3 sons, as he was very important to them. Curry played the role of a grieving, mourning widow to avoid suspicion. Police continued working on the case and found another inconsistency in Curry's testimony. According to her story, she went to her son's room at night without her phone, leaving it charging on the nightstand beside her bed. However, records showed that she was actively using the phone at that time, messaging various people. It was even determined that the phone was in motion, indicating she was walking around the house with it. This information did not match her story. The police questioned Neil, the person who sold the medicine and supplied her with the medicine. He confessed everything. He revealed that she had been experimenting with different drugs, claiming that none of them helped with her severe back pain. Little did Neil know that the drugs had an entirely different purpose. In exchange for testifying against Curry, Neil was not charged. During the investigation, it was discovered that Curry had repeatedly taken out life insurance policies on her husband. Immediately after his death, she contacted the insurance company and received $100,000. The day after her husband died, she hired a locksmith to open his safe and took about $150,000 from it. With Eric gone, there was no one to fund Curry projects, and she was also burdened with significant debts at the time of his death. She owed $190,000 in taxes, $1,847,000 to creditors for a mansion purchase, and another $514,000. Curry then wrote a book called You're With Me with her sons. She wanted a book to help her children cope with the loss of a loved one. So she decided to write it herself. After the book was completed, Curry began appearing on various shows to talk about her book. She said that the death of her husband, Eric, was a shock, and she dedicated the book to him and her children. Sales of the book skyrocketed, becoming widely popular within a few weeks. Many mothers bought it to help their children cope with the loss of a loved one. The book's plot was particularly intriguing. In the story, the husband dies from a brain aneurysm. For the Curry, it was a means to secure financial stability since she was in financial ruin. In the book, Curry seems to imply that she did something to her husband, which seems suspicious. Despite everything, Curry profited from her husband's death, benefiting from insurance payouts and earnings from selling a book. She exploited her children's grief for monetary gain. There were also suspicions that Curry might have killed her husband. Rumors suggested that Curry had an affair during her marriage and wanted to be with this man without losing the affluent lifestyle her husband Eric provided. Divorce would have been financially disadvantageous for Curry, so she allegedly killed her husband to get his money. Another motive was Eric's refusal to finance the purchase of a house. 6 months after her husband Eric died, Curry's family noticed that she was preparing a Pinterest folder with wedding ideas. This confused everyone, since all of her friends and relatives were married and no one was planning a wedding. leading to speculation that Curry might be preparing for her wedding to her lover. On May 8, 2023, 2 months after actively promoting her book, 33-year-old Curry Richens was arrested on charges of first-degree murder with aggravated circumstances. She was also charged with possession of a large amount of a controlled substance. The investigation into her husband Eric's death on May 4, 2022, lasted more than a year. Curry is currently being held without bail pending trial. Curry's neighbors and many family members were shocked and could not believe that she had caused her husband's death. Curry Richens gave numerous interviews, presenting herself as a grieving widow who, even a year after her husband's death, had not yet come to terms with the loss. This strategy helped her gain sympathy from television viewers. The interview was broadcast nationwide, causing a significant public response. Curry received significant support and increased sales of her book. She attempted to defend herself by blaming her late husband for past problems with illegal substances, but this claim has never been verified. The couple's 3 children now live with Eric's family, and temporary custody is with Eric's younger sister, Katie. Curry's book could ultimately be crucial for prosecutors in painting Eric Richens' death as a calculated murder with an elaborate cover-up. The judge has scheduled a pre-trial conference for September 23 for the prosecution and defense to discuss jury selection. A trial date has not yet been set. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Neville and June Bamber. June and Neville became the owners of White House Farm. A Royal Air Force veteran, after many years of service, he transitioned to a position as the master of a small local court. In 1949, June married he at the age of 25, and that same year, they moved into their new farmhouse. Their dream is to have children and build a happy, close family. However, June could not get pregnant. After numerous attempts, they discovered that the issue was genetic, and they would not be able to have biological children. However, they did not lose hope and they were able to find a way to become parents. The Bamber family adopted 2 children from an orphanage. First, they adopted Sheila, who was just 3 months old, and a few years later, they adopted 6-month-old Jeremy. June and Neville cared for and educated their adopted children conscientiously, giving them all their love and tenderness. As Sheila and Jeremy grew up, they ensured they received a good education by sending them to prestigious private schools with high-quality standards. The Bambers' financial situation was very good, allowing them to take care of themselves and their children fully and comfortably. Like any family, June and Neville also faced problems in their relationship. Not having a biological relationship with your children can sometimes make the situation more complicated. However, for the most part, their family life proceeded smoothly, without any major conflicts. In 1985, Sheila was 28, Jeremy was 24, and their adoptive parents, June and Neville, had just turned 60. That summer was so peaceful, with everyone enjoying the sun and nature, until the early hours of August 7th. At 3:30 a.m., Jeremy was awakened by an unexpected phone call. When he answered, he was shocked when he heard his father, Neville, on the other line. Neville's voice was frantic and distressed. He struggled to explain that Sheila had gone crazy and have weapons. While Jeremy still didn't fully understand what was going on, the call suddenly lost connection. Alarmed, Jeremy immediately contacted the police, relaying what Neville had said. He also warned them that Sheila could be dangerous. Despite the urgency, it took the police an hour and a half to arrive at the scene. By then, it was still dark, and the house was shrouded in shadows. The area was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos Neville had described. Since firearms were reportedly involved, the police approached cautiously, adhering to standard procedures. Then, they decided not to enter the house. Instead, they waited outside, wait for the task force to come and handle it. The police positioned themselves at a safe distance from the house and used a megaphone to try to communicate with anyone inside. For more than 2 hours, police tried to contact Bamber's family, but received no response. During this time, the police asked Jeremy to explain what had happened at the Bamber household the previous day. He explained that the entire family had gathered for dinner the night before. Toward the end of the evening, there had been a minor misunderstanding, but not serious. He also mentioned that he had left a pistol and a .22 caliber carbine with his parents. Both guns were in good working order and loaded. Nearly 3 hours after the first police officers arrived, at approximately 8 a.m., the special forces entered the house. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy and somber. The team cautiously advanced, inspecting the first floor. When they entered the kitchen, they found a scene of chaos. A chair facing down on the ground, and next to it, in a pool of blood, was Neville's lifeless body. He had been shot 8 times, 6 of which hit the head, leaving him with little chance of survival. His hands and face were bruised and scraped, with a broken nose and jaw, shows that he fought back drastic against the attacker. The officers completed their search of the first floor, then, they moving upstairs. Each step had to be made with caution to avoid noise, but this is very difficult. Because the floor is old and makes a creaking sound every time it is moved. On the second floor, in 2 bedrooms, they discovered 4 more bodies. They found June, Sheila, and 2 6-year-old boys, Daniel and Nicholas, all of whom had been fatally shot. June had been struck by 7 bullets, while Daniel and Nicholas sustained 5 and 3 shots, respectively. Sheila was found on the threshold of her parents' bedroom, with 2 gunshot wounds under her chin. In total, 25 bullets were used to kill the 5 members of Bamber family. Initially, police theorized that the Bamber family members had been deliberately killed. But who could have committed such an act? Was the perpetrator an acquaintance of the family, who had long planned to harm them and then finally carried it out? Or was the criminal so clever that he tried to fool the police with a fake clue? These questions remained unanswered, prompting the authorities to immediately begin an investigation. It is remarkable that although Sheila and Jeremy were both very well educated, they grew up with completely different personalities. Jeremy was introverted from a young age, preferred solitude, and did poorly in elementary school. Sheila, on the other hand, always had many friends around her. Jeremy is hot-tempered and has difficulty controlling his emotions. Even though his parents tried to educate him, but he still did not change. Eventually, they decided to send him to boarding school, which happened in 1970, when he was 9 years old. Boarding schools in England at that time were famous for their strict and harsh discipline, applied to all ages of students. Attending such institutions was expensive, but this was not an issue for the Bambers. As soon as Jeremy entered the boarding school, he realized he could no longer behave as he had before, as any disobedience was met with punishment. Unfortunately, he made the mistake of telling his classmates that he had come from an orphanage. His friends used that information to bully him. They often taunted him about being adopted, calling him a bastard. His years at boarding school were a challenging period for him. Although they didn't teach him many good things, they did help him improve his character somewhat. Over time, Jeremy became calmer, went on to university, and successfully graduated. Neville was extremely proud of his son and even bought him a ticket to Australia. For the next 4 years, he traveled extensively across the country, spent time living in New Zealand, and eventually returned to England in 1982. Upon his return, his parents, Neville and June, asked him to work on their farm. Along with the job, they provided him with a place to live, a cottage 6 kilometers from the farm, along with a car and a monthly salary of nearly $1,000, a generous amount for the time. They wanted to ensure that he had a comfortable life and did everything they could to support him. Additionally, they hoped he would help them when they were old. June, a very religious woman, had a hard time accepting the fact that her children had different views and attitudes about religion. Throughout her life, she did everything she to guide them toward what she believed was the true path and to bring them closer to God. Unfortunately, her efforts were unsuccessful. So, she had suffered from severe depression, and her mental health had greatly deteriorated. At the time, mental health issues were treated with a crude and outdated method, administering electric shocks to the patient. It was believed that this could positively influence brain function. June's depression wasn't caused solely by her son, Jeremy. Her daughter Sheila, despite her calmer demeanor, also caused her great distress. Sheila enjoyed looking at magazines featuring models in provocative poses. Sheila dreamed of becoming a model and appearing on the cover of such magazines. However, she does not support this. But Sheila's problems don't stop there. One day, Sheila announced to her parents that she was pregnant. In many families, the news might have been met with joy, but the Bamber family is not like that. Sheila was still a teenager and unmarried, which made the situation complicated. June, her adoptive mother, faced a difficult decision. Should she pressure Sheila to have an abortion? As a Christian, June could not condone abortion, but at the same time, allowing the child to be born is unacceptable. Then, June told Sheila to make her own choice, but on the condition that if she had an abortion, no one in the family would know. This makes the relationship between June and Sheila more and more tense. In 1977, despite her parents' objections, Sheila is married to Colin Caffell. They on to have twin sons, Nicholas and Daniel. Initially, their family life seemed happy, but Sheila began to suspect Colin of infidelity. Her suspicions were correct, and she eventually filed for divorce. In 1982, they are officially divorced, which had a devastating impact on Sheila's mental health. She couldn't bear the shock from the divorce, so she fell into depression, and she was eventually admitted to a mental hospital for treatment. Nicholas and Daniel were sent to an orphanage, where they stayed for nearly 2 years. During this time, Sheila's mental health deteriorated further. She became increasingly anxious, frequently spoke about ending her own life and that of her children, whom she believed were possessed by the devil. She was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Meanwhile, Sheila and Jeremy seemed to swap positions with each other. Jeremy, who was a rebel for years, now lives a peaceful and stable life. In 1985, Sheila reconciled with her ex-husband, Colin. Together, they removed Nicholas and Daniel from the orphanage and start a new life together. In August, Neville and June invited Sheila and her family to visit, so they could reunite with their grandchildren, Daniel von Nicholas. They hadn't seen their 2 nephews in a long time. They decided that the family would spend a week together, after which Colin would take the boys on a trip to Norway. On Tuesday, August 6, 1985, Colin brought the boys to the family farm. And everyone gathered at the Bamber house. The day was filled with joy. There was a family dinner, a happy atmosphere, and delicious food. Later, Neville and June asked Sheila to take Daniel and Nicholas back to the orphanage, arguing that she couldn't provide them with a proper education. This suggestion angered Sheila. She replied that she would make the decision herself. The calm atmosphere of the evening was disrupted at 8:30 p.m. Around the same time, Jeremy left the house. Barbara Wilson, the secretary at Bamber Farm, called Neville regarding a work-related matter. When Neville answered, she realized he seemed very annoyed. In the background, she could hear raised voices, as though people were arguing or upset about something. This was unusual for the Bamber family, which surprised she. However, she couldn't learn more about the situation because Neville quickly ended the call and hung up. The next morning, everyone present in Bamber's house was shot dead. Jeremy, the only survivor, was informed of the tragedy. Overcome with grief, he couldn't hold back his tears. Investigators treated him with respect, allowing him time to gather himself before beginning their questioning. Jeremy shared everything he knew, including the hardships Sheila went through, and the argument that had occurred at the dinner table on the evening of August 6th, shortly before he decided to leave the house. At first glance, the crime that Sheila committed seemed to be an act of desperation and impulsivity, because at the time, she was suffering from mental illness. After hearing Neville and June's suggestion that she should return her 2 sons to the orphanage, she felt the interference in her private life was unacceptable. When she lost control, she grabbed a weapon and shot Neville, June, Daniel, Nicholas, and finally shoot yourself. Investigators believe this is what happened. However, there is one very strange detail: Sheila had been shot twice in different parts of her body. How could she have managed to do this to herself? The actions of the detectives were puzzling. They decided to burn the blood-soaked bedsheets carpet where the bodies were found. They explained that they wanted to help Jeremy avoid the painful memories of the incident. Furthermore, the weapon discovered at the crime scene, which was a key piece of evidence, was improperly handled by the investigator. They picked it up with their bare hands without wearing gloves. A few days later, Bamber's family funeral was held, and Jeremy attended. He seemed distraught over the tragedy, weeping over the coffins of his sister, parents, and nephews. However, on that day, the investigation was reopened. Relatives of Bamber's family have expressed concerns about Jeremy's unusual behavior. Despite his tears, he made odd remarks, such as referring to himself as the boss. They found him smiling with the look of someone satisfied with victory. They reported this to police, causing police to conduct a more thorough investigation. Crime scenes need to be investigated carefully and meticulously to avoid drawing hasty conclusions. The detectives began by examining the weapon. They discovered fingerprints from several individuals, including the investigator who had handled the gun without gloves. The appearance of Sheila and Jeremy's fingerprints is not surprising. Jeremy admitted the gun was his, explaining he had purchased it for hunting. It is also understandable that Sheila's fingerprints were on the gun, as the initial theory suggested she had used the gun as the murder weapon. A few days later, Jeremy's cousin secretly went to the Bamber family home to search the house. He convinced that Sheila was not involved in the murder. By this point, Jeremy had inherited to his family home and was living there alone. During the search, the cousin inspected every room and the closet, and he found a silencer for a .22 caliber carbine. Length of the gun, combined with the silencer, made it impossible for the attacker to have turned the weapon on themselves and fired. This discovery strongly suggested that Sheila could not have been the perpetrator. If Sheila had fired the gun without the silencer, a new question arises: why were traces of blood found on the end of the silencer? Sheila, who had been shot twice and was bleeding, could not have removed the silencer and hidden it deep in the closet. This suggests that the silencer was attached to the rifle in the murders. From this point, everything started to become clear. Julie, Jeremy's girlfriend, suspects him of being involved in killing his family. She contacted investigators and shared some information. She revealed that on the night of August 7th, Jeremy had called her, saying there were problems. However, when she tried to ask what was wrong, he abruptly hung up. She also recalled that shortly before the murders, he had repeatedly complained about his family. Most importantly, she revealed that the Bamber family had drawn up a will, which stated that all assets would be passed on to their children after their deaths. This made Jeremy very angry. He did not want to share the inheritance with his sister, Sheila. In addition, Jeremy also told Julie that he wanted to kill his family and blame it on Sheila, a mentally ill person. She reported all of this to the police, not because she wanted to help the investigation, but because she was feeling angry, so she had just learned that Jeremy had a new girlfriend. However, there is no direct evidence to prove Jeremy's guilt. He tried to mislead the investigation. He gave the police the name of a suspect, a plumber he to have hired. However, when investigators questioned the plumber, they learned that he was completely innocent. He also has a solid alibi, helped to remove any suspicion against him. As a result, Jeremy Bamber became the primary suspect. He was taken into custody due to his inability to provide an alibi. However, the police released him after failing to find evidence linking him to the massacre. Surprisingly, he was allowed to leave the country. After inheriting the property, Jeremy's financial situation improved a lot. He sold Neville's car and to Saint-Tropez, France. Upon returning to England on September 29, he was arrested and charged with the murder of the Bamber family. The trial began on October 3. One of the main points raised in court was about Neville's injuries. His body showed multiple bruises, suggesting that he had tried to defend himself from an attack. The medical examiner speculated that the injuries were caused by the same .22 caliber carbine. Sheila, a petite and frail woman, it seemed unlikely that she could have inflicted such severe injuries on her father. In contrast, Jeremy appeared capable of doing so. Neville's body showed signs of a struggle, with multiple bruises. Sheila also received several blows, but there were no signs of a struggle on her body, and her nails remained intact. The defense countered these arguments, that believed that Sheila suffered from mental illness, which made her the prime suspect, capable of committing a five-fold murder. They emphasized that she grew up on a farm, was skilled at handling guns, and was an experienced target shooter. Additionally, Jeremy's lawyers highlighted that Sheila's blood was fresher than the rest of the family's, so they claiming that she ended her life after killing others. This, they argued, could have been due to guilt or the sound of approaching police cars. However, the prosecution disputed these claims. If Sheila had been the killer and then end her life, then the policeman on duty near the house, they will hear the last gunshot. However, no sound was detected. Furthermore, Sheila could not have pulled the trigger with the silencer attached, as it would have been out of her reach. The silencer was also found in a closet, rather than on the carbine where it logically should have been. The defense is in a difficult position because it has no arguments to refute the prosecution. According to the prosecution's argument, the motive for the murder stemmed from Jeremy's anger when he learned the contents of the will. In the will, the inheritance was divided equally between him and Sheila. His greed for the inheritance led him to plan a massacre. On August 6, between 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m., Jeremy left his relative's house and went home. Later that night, he returned to their house on a bicycle he had taken from his mother, June, a few days earlier. He took a roundabout route and entered the house through an open bathroom window on the first floor. He climbed inside, retrieved the loaded gun, and went to June's bedroom. Then, he shot and killed her with 2 shots. Next, he aimed the gun at Neville, but Neville woke up and tried to defend himself, leading to a fight. During the struggle, he managed to shoot Neville. After killing Neville, Jeremy returned to the bedroom and killed Sheila and her 2 children, Daniel von Nicholas. He then staged the scene to make it look like Sheila was the perpetrator, he placing the carbine in her hands. With his crime complete, he left the house on his bike. He called his girlfriend, Julie, almost revealing what he had done, and then called the police to report that Neville had allegedly called him. However, if Neville was threatened with a weapon, he would contact the police, not Jeremy. Jeremy's actions seemed to make everyone feel strange. Why didn't he come to the crime scene immediately after Neville's call? After considering the evidence and various assumptions, the jury deliberated for 9 hours and reaching a verdict. Ultimately, Jeremy Bamber was convicted of 5 murders and sentenced to 5 life terms in prison with no chance of parole. Jeremy, meanwhile, maintains his innocence.